All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our mini workshop today. We have a very long day. We'll start with our 2 o'clock workshop. You all know we're going to take time today to finalize our board norms and protocols. We're also going to get an update from academic affairs with some particular focus on the work that's happening in we call it special ed, but Dr. Boone, what's the official?
Well, special education is special education.
Special education. Okay, I know it's a different title for the department. Then we'll go into closed session to prepare for what we would normally do with our regular business meeting dealing with personnel matters and some legal matters. After that, we will break for a brief dinner, and then we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock for our business meeting. Is there anything that anyone like to have considered as far as the agenda as you have it before you? Everyone comfortable with that? I want to take an opportunity. Arturo, you mind walking over for a moment, please?
Yes.
So this is Arturo Mendoza.
Nice to meet you all.
He is our school board rep for the coming year, and he just returned a couple weeks ago from Princeton. I haven't had a chance to do a one-on-one or anything with him yet because he's been busy all summer. But I'm gonna just hand you the mic. You like to just introduce yourself and say a few words?
All right. Well, thank you for allowing me to be here today. I'm very excited to work with the school board this year. I was at Princeton University for around 7 weeks this summer. I spent my whole summer there with a program called the Leadership Enterprise for a Diverse America, where I received instruction in aspects of Leadership Institute, where they really introduced us to leadership philosophies and ideals and how to really become better leaders in the modern world now. And honestly, I'm very excited to apply those teachings and all the facilitation we received there here to the school board as a part of the school board representative for Norfolk Public Schools. I'm also an LCSC student at Norview High School. I'm one of the ambassadors for the program. That's why I'm wearing this shirt, because today we had orientation, so I kind of didn't get all fancy, but at least I have my shirt. But I'm very excited today, and I'm excited. I came today to see kind of how the procedures and everything works, and I'm excited to be here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Welcome. It's good to see you.
So as Arturo said, he's going to be sitting over and watching us today, and I was explaining to him a little bit earlier about how we normally have our work session and go into a business meeting, and today is a little bit of a hybrid, but we know we're going to look forward to his input, just as we were last year with Torian. And then in our September business meeting, I believe it is, we're going to do a formal mini ceremony with him to get him sworn in as our next student rep to the school board. So again, we appreciate you being here, and we'll get your email and contact information, and we'll be reaching out to you, and we'll move from there. So proceeding on with the agenda, first item we have is the board norms and protocols that we've worked with. Anyone have any additional recommended changes or modifications to what you have before you? We spent some time on it at the last meeting. We spent some time on it in training. We spent the last 6 months working on this. I do have one minor change I'd like to offer, but does anyone else have any suggestions at all as far as the norms first, and then we'll just review again the violations document that we have as well.
I suggest we vote on it.
We will. We're going to do that right now. I have one minor change that I'd like to put out for the board's consideration before we vote, and that would be under letter M, school visits. Currently says board members must notify, and I just think the must should be a shall, which makes it consistent with the rest of the guidelines. So is that acceptable to change the must to a shall? So we're good with that. And then if you also will bring up the second document that deals with our violation protocols. At the last meeting, we designated or asked Reverend Haywood if he would serve as our monitor, so to speak, and he agreed to do so. So any questions at all on the norms and protocols violation policy. Okay? Hearing none, I'll
I
entertain.
guess I have a question about
Okay.
how that works. How-
Okay.
If there is an offense, board designee shall meet with the individual,
Mhm.
not the school board chair?
Correct, the designee. It doesn't mean that the chair would not, but in our current process that we've talked about, we recommended a designee.
Not gonna fight it, I'm not sure necessarily agree with it, but I'm not gonna. I'll withdraw the
Okay.
question.
Well, ideally, we are monitoring, doing self-monitoring. We always are going to be speaking to one another and talking to one another and working with one another. This just provides an additional process for us to address it if the manner in which we normally do doesn't seem to bring resolution, then we have an official process for moving
It's nothing
forward.
against, it's nothing against Reverend Haywood or anybody else that sits in that process. I just think it would be something the leadership should do. That's just my personal feeling.
Duly, we accept, and what we said was we would, we can always revisit any of our policies and procedures if we feel that it requires additional modifications. So let's see how this goes, and we can
Hopefully we
revisit
won't
it in
need
6
it.
months. Exactly, as we're saying, this is hopefully is a rare occurrence to begin with. Having said that, is there a motion for us to adopt our norms and protocols and our norms and protocols violation policy with amendments?
I move that we adopt our norms and protocols and violation policy
Do I have a second?
With the amendment.
with an amendment that the board chair is the designee.
No, with the amendment that,
Must,
Oh,
shall.
Right,
change-
must to
I
shall.
thought we were agreeing to that. To change the word must to shall. I'm
Right.
sorry.
is there a second?
I'll
Second.
Okay. Any further discussion? All right, hearing none. Ms. Banks, if you call the roll, please.
Ms. Basine,
Aye.
Ms. Doyle,
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel,
Aye.
Reverend Haywood,
Aye.
Dr. Robinson,
Aye.
Ms. Wagner,
Aye.
Mr. Jordan.
Aye. Thank you. So we will get that printed up in a nice big format where we can all sign, as well as have a individualized version as well. But appreciate all the work and effort that's gone into to get us to that point. Next on the agenda, we have a superintendent report from Dr. Boone.
Yes, and I apologize for being on my phone. I forgot to bring my copy in. Give me just 1 second to get
Okay.
those in. No, this is something else that I need. In this particular meeting, we talked about a number of things that we wanted to continue updating the board on, and one of those, and actually, I think we may have prepared that for the formal session, but do you want me to do it now? Thank you. The SRL updates from yesterday's.
We can, what's your comfort level?
I think we're ready now, aren't we, Dr. Bailey? If we wanted to do that portion of the SRL update for the board now? Yeah, and then we can keep the superintendent's report in the formal session to recognitions and some other things.
Okay.
Okay, perfect.
Can we start with the special ed first? I need to go and send it.
Okay, well, we can do that. Why don't we move on to do the presentation under academic affairs, so we can come back to that.
Thank you. I apologize. I stepped from one meeting into this one, and see, Annalisa just brought me the folder, so. This afternoon, in continuing with the board's planning for areas of discussion and presentation, we have scheduled the update on special education, and as it relates to, I think, 3 big areas, and Dr. Rogers and Dr. James Mitchell will be the lead presenters on this. but we're looking at student academic achievement for our students with disabilities, how we're performing as it relates to the state's performance report that's also linked to the federal government for students with disabilities. What's the story behind the efforts that we have underway to continue to improve the outcomes for students with disabilities, and linking all of that in a meaningful way. So that's our goal for this time together. So with this, I'll turn it over to Dr. Rogers and Dr. James Mitchell.
Thank you, Dr. Boone. Mr. Jordan, school board members, this afternoon, as Dr. Boone shared, we will be providing you with an overview of where we are with our students with disabilities, our special education update. And give me 1 second, I got two.
We've also utilized the same format that we did for the SOL update to the board last meeting. Again, being consistent, so you will see which school board goal we're looking at on this particular one, and you'll see a very similar format. We think that's important for consistency of message and connecting to the work over time.
Thank you. The presentations look the same. I have the one that Dr. Bailey is going to get, so they all color the same. But anyway, so our special education update for this year, data at a glance. What you have before you, the chart before you, just shows you our student population by level, the total number of students that we have who are identified with disabilities. And as you'll notice, that there are no significant changes between the percentage of students who have been identified at the elementary or secondary level. They're ever so slight changes, 2 percentage points respectively in elementary, middle, and high school. The student demographics or breakdown as far as race and gender are concerned. Again, there are no significant different changes from the previous year. You will note that we do have about 64% of our students identified as Black or African American who receive special education services. And gender-wise, we have 68%, so it's almost twice as many females receiving special education services, and those numbers have not changed since the last year.
You mean males?
I'm sorry,
68%
males and females, yes, correct.
And again, you know, one of the things the state will look at in the performance report is disproportionality, and you think about our overall district demographics. That's why this information is important to present to the board, so we can see that.
It's commensurate with the information that we shared last year. The categories have been identified from autism through visual impairment, and as you'll notice that, again, there are no significant changes from those numbers that we had from the previous year, with the exception of, you may want to look at intellectual disabilities and students and other OHI, other health impairments, as well as specific learning disabilities. There's some slight changes there, but none that are significantly different from one year to the next.
Dr. Rogers, before you go into student performance, can we just pause? Any questions or comments or thoughts regarding the demographics and the categories? Ms. Basine.
With the demographics, I think it would be interesting also to look at it, and we may not be able to do this for the smaller ethnic groups for confidentiality purposes, but to look at economically disadvantaged as well, because I know there's some broader discussions around overrepresentation among, you know, Black students, but that could also be reflective of other things, where there's also a theory that where we could be under identifying, even though it appears like there's over identification. You know, there's two.
So an economically disadvantaged.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful for us to look at as well. And I'm not sure if we were able to do this, but for the disability categories, to see from a state level how they break out and how we compare.
We can. Those data are readily available on the VDOE website under the Special Education Performance Report, but
Right.
we can certainly try to pull that for the board.
Yeah, and I did see that, but to visually look at it at
Yeah.
the.
We are not very different from, I don't think we have any particular area, I'm looking at Dr. James Mitchell, but as I've looked at the data, we don't have any particular area that stands out
Okay.
significantly higher than others in the state, do we, in terms of the overall demographics? No, I didn't think so.
Yeah,
So we are
okay.
pretty much, in terms of our percentages, in line. You'll find some districts that their autism numbers are very large. We see about a third of the students have specific learning disabilities. In the 80s is when we saw specific learning disabilities take a real jump in terms of the numbers. And for some school districts, that might have been 50% of their overall population. That and speech-language impairments were the two large areas. And you see our primary speech-language impairments is very low. So we're beginning to see some moderation of numbers over time, not just for Norfolk, but I think in general.
Dr. Gabriel?
When we're grouping attention deficit disorder, are we lumping that into one of these categories? I know sometimes it is classified as a disability for some, and then for others, it's not. Is that anywhere embedded within this chart?
Yes, it
Yes.
is.
I didn't hear, what was her question? I didn't hear.
For attention ADD,
Oh, 80, okay.
would it be within one of these categories?
Yes, it is. It's other health impairments.
Okay.
If that's the primary. And you will recall that in order for ADHD to qualify as a disability, the impact on the student's educational opportunities and outcomes has to be significant enough to qualify under other health impairment. So every student with ADD or ADHD does not automatically qualify as a student with disabilities and have an IEP. Many students have their services provided through Section 504 of the Disability Act, the Americans with Disabilities Act. But again, and there are some students who don't, the nature of their ADD, ADHD doesn't require any intervention at all, so.
Ms. Wagner?
Yes.
Looking at your ID population, are they at specific schools or
This is across the district.
district? I mean, but how are they housed in terms?
Yeah.
We could share. Okay, so they are in collab classrooms or inclusion. They are in self-contained, or they may be self-contained and collab. It depends on the minutes or the service delivery model that the IEP team determines that is necessary to educate them. We still want to look at the least restrictive environment first, which is usually the collab or the inclusion
Okay.
setting, general education.
So I guess I was looking at this, the ID kids that are probably below the, 60%?
As it,
The IQ
You.
oh,
is below the 60%?
yes, ma'am. 70 and below, if they hadn't changed. it,
70 and
but
below,
yeah.
okay. So I guess I was wondering with that, when they do the, and I'm actually going back to your question in terms of the demographics. When, do we find that we have more, once they're tested, more ID at in a particular area? Demographic area, let's say, maybe more at, Lake Taylor than maybe the Morey area, and I shouldn't do high school because high school, it's, you're
Well,
busing.
Yeah.
But I guess I'm looking at.
Let me see if I can help with that question. You're trying to figure out the schools that students would normally attend if they did not have a disability based on those who have been identified as having an intellectual disability.
Right.
Are we seeing them coming from one sector of the city
More
more than
so,
another?
yeah,
We would have to go back and really research those data,
okay,
because the serving school does not represent the
right.
school they would normally attend all
Okay.
the time.
So, and that's probably the data that I'm after
Yeah,
to see.
and generally speaking, the school-by-school breakdown, we said we would get later in the
Right.
fall. Yeah.
Okay.
We'll get that. But again, if the population is less than a certain number, those data won't be available because the students could be readily identified.
Okay.
And remember too, when we present that the serving school will not represent this necessarily their home attendance school.
What percentage of our special ed kids are in CSEP?
We have a very small percentage
Very small
because
percent.
as maybe 1%, if that amount.
And it's because we try to educate them in NPS first, because we have programs or division-wide programs which we can educate students with autism, students with an emotional disability. And so we don't have to send or have CSEP to provide educational services to all of the students who may require something a little bit more specific or more involved, restrictive. So the population is not much. If you would like me to get that information for you, I can.
You know, from your work on as the CSEP board, we have a very small population because it is about a more restrictive environment. It is not the first level of service provision. And so we can certainly show that there are two primary categories that our students are receiving services at CSEP: autism and students with serious emotional disturbance.
Correct.
Those are our two primary categories where students need a much more restrictive environment than one of our comprehensive schools or programs, but not at the point of needing any residential or anything. And so these are the places where they are supported mostly. So those are our two primary categories.
So now are CSEP classes still within the school?
So
I
Ms.
know some of
Wagner,
them would-
Yes.
so I want to let them, I just wanted to first just get questions on the first 5.
Okay.
And then we'll get through the rest of the presentation, and we'll go back to the general questions, because I just want to make sure they have time to get through the presentation. But specific to these first 5 slides, is there any additional thoughts or questions? Because I just had one. On the student demographic breakdown, Ms. Bassine raised the question about disproportionality. As I'm looking at the slide 4, if I'm looking at it correctly, it pretty much reflects the overall demographics of the division. Is that correct?
For the
Pretty
most
much
part,
mirrors
yes.
that.
So, having said that, are we saying that we do not see areas of disproportionality, or what's the demographic saying to us?
When we get to the performance report piece, there are some indicators, and there are areas where we have not been cited as having
Okay.
significant disparity based on race or gender in areas. What this tells us is that very close to the district's overall demographics, our students with disabilities are falling into that area. If we had 85% of our students with disabilities were black students, and yet only about 68% of the students are in the general school population, that would be the indication of a serious discrepancy.
Right, so, but from the gender side, that's where it seems to be the skew, is that
Right,
correct?
the gender side is not commensurate with our student population.
It's not, but it is commensurate with what we see in special education in general,
Right.
that there tend to be more males identified as having a disability than females.
And just out of, and why is that?
That's a long answer, and so that's a long research
ask you another
thing.
question.
But what I'm saying,
Why is it in Norfolk? How about that? Could I answer that?
it's the same answer.
It's not unique.
It's not, it's everywhere.
It's not a Norfolk. That's why I said this is a long answer. Historically, research has shown that more males tend to be eligible for disabilities. We see more males generally in serious emotional disturbance. We see more females emerging in autism, but still that's predominantly male. So as you go through the various disability categories, we see males coming in. Now, one of the things that's been a national point of research and monitoring is how many males, particularly African-American males or Latino Hispanic males, carry the disability category of serious emotional disturbance. And so that becomes whether or not, and that's one of those areas that the federal government monitors and states monitor. Or do we have disproportionate representation by race in that particular category, meaning that are we not accepting, as a school district or as education in general, not accepting of a student's cultural and behavioral concerns, and therefore over-identify based on those things. So that's the very mini Reader's Digest version of how that shakes out nationally. I know Ms. Basine wants to add.
Well, and I'll share from an epidemiologic standpoint that certain conditions like autism are shown to be, 4 to 5 times from a diagnosis standpoint, they more at risk for those from a diagnostic perspective. So then you would see them probably more eligible for special ed in the schools as well. For whatever reason, that's,
No, I'm off of that right there. I just have one other question. For the specific learning disability, do we see more of our overage for grade students in that area?
I think we would have to look into that, but a lot of times we would have to specifically look and see if the students are there. Often our students who end up being identified, once they become overage for grade, could fall in any of those categories. But specific learning disabilities and those criteria will show up usually with students who may have been developmentally delayed until about the age 8, 9, 10, and then we begin to see their learning profile emerge such that the specific learning disability is what we see. I think the general language that's often used with students with learning disability, overage for students, we say they have learning needs, and people equate that to the true definition of a disability. I think you'll find overage for grade students in just about every category, probably with the exception of speech language.
But you don't think it would be a significant number in that
I
specific?
don't know, I can't venture, I would have to look it up.
So just to, just to come back, one of the reasons I was just asking about the extremely long answer, I just think as we've looked at things in our accountability plan, and as we have the ongoing discussions around discipline disparities and other things that we're looking at, while I appreciate the fact that it may be something that people are seeing around the country, if we find that in our division, that aside from
The science.
the science, but in terms of the culture or anything where it may involve bias or perception, then what do we do as a division, or how do we note the fact that we may need to have some conversations around how do we address those things? And that's what I was trying to get at in terms of why we see the disparity with the males.
So to answer part of what you're talking about, when we talk about the state performance plan indicators, indicator number 10 is an indicator that does look at a disproportionality of black males who are intellectually disabled. So what took place with that is we had to do a cap, and when you talk about
Corrective action plan.
okay,
Right, first. Thank
let
you.
me get my
Yes,
letters and
yes.
speak it out. But when we had to do one for indicator 10. And speaking about cultural differences, we had training that VDOE provided to psychologists, school psychologists, social workers, because they make that determination, help make that determination when a child is found eligible for special education related services. So training has taken place in reference to what you're talking about.
Okay. All right, let's
Go for slide
Let you-
6.
let you keep going to student performance. Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So now we'll transition into student performance. And as was shared at your previous board meeting, we gave a holistic view of where we were with our student data. And what you'll find overall is that our data with students with disabilities mirrors some of the patterns and trends that we saw with our gen ed population. So if you'll notice the slide that you have in front of you with reading, as was done with our gen ed students, we did realize some gains with our students with disabilities. They saw a 3 percentage point gain from the previous year, and that is certainly commensurate with the gains realized with the state. So
And we realized something didn't upload when we put this version up. But let me also give you an indicator. One of the what do you call it?
Budget keys. Okay.
The keys, right, in the
Budget
key
keys.
list, right. The dotted red line represents the Norfolk district performance.
Right.
And so the dotted lines on both, the blue and the red, represent district performance, blue being district for all students, the solid lines being the state. And so we thought it important this year to add our performance in relation to not just all students, but in relation to statewide with students with disabilities, so that you could see where we're performing. And what Dr. Rogers was saying is that we have seen slight increases, and that's very consistent. Our mapping, as you'll look at these by content, mirrors very closely what we heard from the state as those results were just released yesterday.
Just as a notation moving forward, one of the things we were trying to do is also be able to assess ourselves or measure ourselves against divisions that are similar to ours.
If you hold that thought, we have it there.
Yes, ma'am. Boy, you
It's
cranky,
there.
cranky today. Sorry.
No.
Absolutely.
It's there. Give us a
Jordan, I like to look at that data too. Actually,
We,
I'd like to do
we
that
listen
first.
and we
I'm
try
sorry,
to
go ahead.
anticipate.
Yes,
so.
ma'am.
Absolutely. So we apologize, we'll make that correction. It's probably in version 12.
Yeah, it's good. So we just,
All right. So with writing, we saw similar patterns in terms of improvement. We did realize a slight increase, as did the district as a whole, as did the state as a whole, and the students with disabilities at the state level as well. We're pleased about the progress, and we certainly plan on capitalizing on some of the things that we saw that were effective in working with all of our students, and particularly with those with disabilities. The slide before you has information about student performance in math, and as indicated, the dotted line does represent Norfolk Public Schools students with disabilities, and as you'll note, as had our general education students, the basic information, we saw a slight decline in student performance in math as well, and that is certainly commensurate with that in the state. We're not thrilled about those results, and we are certainly actively planning on addressing those deficiencies, not only with students with disabilities, but as was shared at your last meeting, with all of our students as well. You know, it wasn't a lot, but it was enough to attract our attention to it.
the board will recall at the last meeting when we were looking at all student performance in the aggregate, and we talked about, what are the trends that we're seeing, and we indicated even then that when our students with disabilities are following the same general pattern and trend as the district is, then we know that the access to the core curriculum is what's being used for students. Then how do we accelerate their progress through the system of supports and everything so that we can begin to close the gap, both with the performance with the state and the performance benchmarks that are expected. So as you look at these core content, the good news is we're not having some wide skew between our student performance and what would have been expected both state and district. We see that same trend line going forward.
And to your point, Dr. Boone, as was shared at the last meeting, we do include all of our special education teachers and all of our professional development so that they can make sure that they're planning specialized instruction for students with disabilities that provides them access with the general curriculum so that they're assessed with the general curriculum as well. You'll note the same pattern and trend is holding true for students with disabilities in the area of history, and as was shared in your previous meeting, we can attribute that to several factors, all of which are similar to those in the other content areas where we saw a slight decline. And I will remind the board that we did do some things differently at the secondary level in terms of realignment of their coursework. And once we start peeling back layers, we can truly see where we need to do some additional work in terms of professional development, curriculum, and assessment in those areas. But you'll note that the decline is similar to that of the entire district as well as at the state level in general ed as well as with special students with disabilities. Science, same thing, similar to that of the other content areas with the exception of English and writing. We did see a slight decline in the area of students with disabilities, but we also did the same thing with regard to general education. We had a pretty lengthy discussion at your last board meeting with regards to what our needs are in the area of science. It wasn't significant as a whole when we look at our general education students, but it was enough to attract our attention such that we pay particular attention as we go about our work with curriculum instruction and assessment. We also talked about doing some things differently with regards to working with our long-term substitutes and planning purposefully and meaningfully with the professional development that they receive so that they are able to deliver the curriculum with a level of fidelity that they wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Any questions about that before I move on? Okay.
All right, so now, Mr. Jordan.
All right, so Mr. Jordan.
So just for clarity, if you go back a slide,
Absolutely.
all I was trying to say is this shows a trend of the division against the state.
And against our, right,
Right.
our general and the state general.
Right, so all we're saying is additionally on this graph, if we had how some other divisions were doing as a whole, we would be able to see how our trend is doing in addition to their trend. That's what I understand.
Right, the next slide does that, because when we start looking at comparison districts, this slide would have so many data points on it that it would be difficult to read. And so that's why we've done the bar graphs on the next pages that do
Right,
address.
and I'm not saying that
Yeah.
it would need to be this many data points. I was just simply saying that if I look at the graph that we have on the screen now, I can see how the state is trending, I can see how we're trending. When I look at by reading, it shows it in a, one snapshot for a particular year.
Right.
But I was just curious, trying to get a sense of how other divisions may also be trending
We can
similarly
certainly
against the
look at
state.
that.
That's all. That's all I was trying to say.
Understood.
Ms. Basine?
Yes.
Oh, and in addition to that, or, that's one way, but we had talked about also looking at our major disability categories to see if, as part of our accountability
Right.
plan, and
And we do have some additional information, some of which we have 1 year's worth of information. It's a voluminous, too much for this slide, and it wouldn't be visible, but we do have a report for some information for the board. Is that what we have? We'll provide that to you,
okay, great.
Dr. Bailey's.
All right, there you can go ahead, sir.
Okay. The slide you have before you gives a comparison to the state as well as similar school divisions' pass rates in reading for students with disabilities. And if you'll note, all of us surrounding school district, probably the school district that's closest to ours in terms of demographic would be Newport News and Hampton.
So you can see, again, while there is the gap between Norfolk's performance of students with disabilities and the state, you can also see for districts that are showing progress, we're in that pack. Virginia Beach and Chesapeake lead that. We also know their overall student performance is beyond ours at this point also. But I think, again, to Mr. Jordan's point, we'll see what we can pull back over a couple of years to look at trends. But this was, again, our goal to put in some comparison districts and what we see in terms of the success of students with disabilities.
Questions about this? Next slide you have is a comparative chart on similar school divisions, students with disabilities performance in math. And if you'll note, again, the school districts that are similar to ours would be Newport News and Hampton.
And Roanoke also is a very good comparison district, though not in our region.
Any questions about our performance as it relates to the surrounding school districts?
Dr. Robinson.
Will we be getting a report on strategies and process to make changes in these?
Yes, when we have the story behind the numbers,
Yes.
that's our discussion of what our efforts have been and what the efforts will be.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So before we get to that, we do want to talk about compliance. So you have instruction and compliance. And as you know, annually we get a special education performance report that shares how we've done with regards to the accountability measures that have been set forth by the Virginia Department of Education. And I will point out that the data that you have before you is backdate, or it's from the previous school year. We don't get current school year information until a later time. I believe it's in the year after, in June or July, about this time. So the data that you have before you with regards to compliance refers back a year behind. So if you note, in the first slide we missed the mark in a couple of indicators that we just talked about, one of which is identifying a significant discrepancy in the rate of suspensions by race. And pretty much what that's saying is our students with disabilities suspended at a rate that's higher than those students who don't have disabilities. And last year it was reported that we met that, we had a cap that addressed that.
Corrective action plan.
Corrective action plan that addressed that. And this year we anticipate that we will do some things similar to that. It's a continuing conversation with Dr. Harold Lanz's department and how we address that in conjunction with Dr. James Mitchell's department, with how we look at how we work with our schools and administrators in addressing what requests do we have with students with disabilities and how we administer corrective behavior plans with them. So we're working on that. The other area that we did not meet was the division identified with disproportionate representation of special education by race and disability. And we just had that conversation about, do we have disproportionate numbers of students who are of color or of disability. And division timeline met for initial ineligibility. We missed it by 0.67%, which is not a lot, and there are various reasons behind that. And Dr. Janice James Mitchell works very closely with all of our schools to ensure that we meet those timelines for initial eligibility. They're given from the time that a request is made, the clock starts, the calendar counts from that. And I think you have
65 days.
65 days in order to meet specific timelines, and 99.33% is.
I was going to say, that, you know, in terms of the success, I mean, it's obvious that obviously we're doing a really good job in terms of meeting that standard. That's why we didn't get a 0 score for that. We did get 1 score. You only get the 2 when you get at 100. But in a district of this size and the number of students with disabilities and the number initial and other evaluations we have annually, I think this speaks very well of our processes, you know, in terms of 99.33%. Small districts, you know, a long time ago in ODARC 30, when I was a SPED director, I had what was considered a perfect administrative review, federal monitoring. And even then, with that perfect, it said, it didn't mean that they didn't find a couple of records that hadn't met the timelines, but it was very obvious that that was not the rule, that was more of the exception. And so, again, if we're at 99%, better than 99% of our processes are being completed on time. Yes, 100% is the standard and is the expectation, but we're very close to that.
And we're certainly working with our schools and staff to make sure that we are adhering to those timelines to be met. Which takes us to the next one, division met timeline for Part C to Part B eligibility by the 3rd birthday. Those are our preschool students, and we are working with our staff to make sure that we have the proper staff to do those eligibilities, which has been a challenge as of late. And Dr. Janice James Mitchell and her staff are working very closely with Dr. Harold Lanz's department as well as with schools too. And we have a pretty good plan that we haven't solidified on how to address working toward 100% in those areas for Part C to Part B. A lot of things can be attributed to that, I think. Janice, you want to speak a little bit on it?
Sure. So, we receive a lot of outside agency referrals to the preschool assessment team. We have one assessment team, but we've strived to get two. What has happened is certified school psychologist, social worker. We have to have those two personnel to complete another team along with others. We've had a difficult time all year trying to get Dr. Harold Lands, trying to get school psychologists to make up the ones that she doesn't have just for the schools in general. So the preschool assessment team has fallen behind in meeting the eligibility timeline because of the staffing piece.
Right, and the board will recall, when we've done our personnel updates, we've talked about those vacancies and the challenge we've had in filling school psychology vacancies. And it's one of the reasons you all will recall too, in this FY18 budget, that we increase our contracted services and reduce the number of positions for occupational therapists, both for evaluation and service delivery, because we weren't able to fill them. So in order to make sure our students are receiving the services and we're completing those processes on time, that's why we moved to contract services for OT. And so this is one of those areas that, again, we continue to look to fill, and we continue to be aggressive in our recruitment and hiring of school psychologists, but we have had vacancies for a number of years.
Can we contract those also?
We can, but that's a little more difficult in terms, and a little more expensive too, in terms of the on-site, the classroom observations and pieces that go along with it. But it is something we have considered. But again, we're at 97. If we were at 87, you know, the red lights would really be going. But I think, again, we're trending in that, we're moving in that right direction. We're keeping it there, and it's our goal to be able to hire and close that gap sooner than later.
When I read this and saw that we didn't meet the target, I immediately remembered in the special education plan that we reviewed in April, there was that piece that we had talked about whether we were required to allocate, 15% of the Part B funds for this early coordinated services. Does that in any way impact, or is there any relationship between
No
those two?
relationship between
No
the two.
relationship, okay.
Any other questions about these indicators?
Go to the
Well,
next one.
I
Oh,
do.
you got one?
So on the two indicators where we have the zero scores, and I know you described efforts that are on the way to continue to work on those, but can you give us a sense of how long we've been in that status? Is this something that we've seen over multiple years? Is it something that has gone up and down? What's been the
Well,
trend in that regard?
Ever since I've been a specialist and an administrator, it's continuous because of the population, African American, and
I guess, the way to,
we can't determine.
I think what I'm hearing her say, and I know what we've talked about and what I've seen, is that working to make sure we're educating our teams well, that we're, in terms of what the discipline, I mean, the discipline one, the identification is one place. How are we educating and making sure that we are not counting cultural differences as being a disability? I often think about when I was trained as a speech therapist. We are trained to hear or identify a problem with speech language and remediate it. That's the medical rehab model. But when you focus on the educational model with speech language services, what's the impact on access to the general curriculum and success? And so when we think about the identification, we have to make sure in speech, difference versus deviance. So they are dialectical things, all of those things that we have to make sure that we don't do as a speech therapist in order to over-identify. Same thing we have to do with our teams to identify. As far as the suspension piece is something that the board is monitoring overall. And so when we disaggregate, and we'll provide, data later in this fall as we look at our discipline data and suspension data, this is where we begin to see, again, the overrepresentation of suspensions by race. And that's larger than special education. That's about our policies, our code of student conduct, how we are navigating and facilitating the discipline process in the schools. And so that, again, though flagged through the performance report with special education, it is a district issue even for students not disabled.
And I think we continue to have that conversation with Dr. Harold Lands with regards to how we look at discipline, as Dr. Boone said, from a holistic perspective. I know, we've had conversations about restorative justice. Do we always need to suspend kids out of school because we know if they can't be in school, then they can't learn. So I think it's a mind shift that we continue to have conversations about to address this very need.
Yeah, and I'm gonna come to you, but on the suspension issue, I got a good feel for many of the things you just talked about that I know what we talked about as a board. On the identification piece of it, I guess I'm trying to figure out, is there anything that we're doing differently this year that is really going to start to make the turn, or are we still in a assessment and analysis phase where we will come later on with something?
We're doing some of both. Part of it deals with that silo piece that we've talked about, and schools and leadership teams and assessment teams who view special education as the place to deal with students versus all students being part of the collective school community, and how do we ensure their success. We tend to find, historically, not just in Norfolk, but in other places, schools that have lower education overall student achievement tend to have greater referral numbers and greater numbers of students identified as being disabled.
And Dr. Boone, if I may, to your point, from a holistic standpoint, because we're focusing on what we talk about a lot as first or tier 1 instruction, especially in the early grades when kids don't get stuff the first time, and it has been a pattern in past years. I'm not suggesting that happens now. If students don't understand something the first time it's taught, it has not been a widespread practice to deliberately go back and identify skills that kids didn't know and understand and do some reteaching or present it in a different fashion. When that happens over time and you have staff members that don't have that skill set to understand that, I have a group of students or a couple of students in my class who did not understand consistently information that was shared with them the first time, then there must be something that we need to have some additional investigation on.
Right, and it's to that point, to what Dr. Rogers is saying, that's that third gear in our redesign, and this tier 1 is rigor, how everyone is getting access to strong instructional practices, and then what's the system of supports around that. But we also have to shift the mindset and the culture from special education being viewed as an intervention rather than a support. And so when we use over-identification, or we use the identification process as a means of getting students into the support system, supports are available outside of a student being identified as disabled. And that's where we've got to do some more of that work around the culture, around the expectations, around putting things in the school's toolboxes when we think about support, so that they go to interventions first before moving to the identification.
Dr. Robinson.
When you talk about changing this culture, is this primarily in special education, or is this district-wide? Going back and reteaching concepts that weren't...
So that's part of that district expectation. You remember I talked one time about the pyramid, where the larger portions at the base, and then at the peak, the apex of the pyramid, you should have in red your kids who need the greatest level of intervention, and those numbers should be a lot lower than those in the green area, meaning they are meeting expectations. What we found in some instances, to what I was saying before, we're using interventions, that pyramid has been flipped. So the apex has very few kids in the green, and most of the kids are identified as being in the red, needing interventions. That's not the case of what we know about our children. And so we have to make sure that we're focused on that strong teaching in the beginning, such that the students then, the fewer numbers of students that need intervention are fewer, and that people don't feel overwhelmed that I've got to reteach everyone. But, what did the data show us? How are we using our district benchmark assessments? How are we using common formative assessments for all students to see, is this something that needs to be retaught because the majority of the students didn't get it, or is this something that an individual student or a couple of students need support with?
This is deja vu all over. I've heard this before, and not just from this administration, but previous administrations. When does that teaching model get down to it and actually be employed? I'm not trying to be divisive or.
That's the same thing I was asking.
Well, and I'll take us back to the presentation that we did to the board about the district redesign earlier this summer, the focus school work of how we are moving the alignment of the professional development. You will recall, and I believe I remember comments from you that the alignment of what we were saying around our focus school work, our redesign, made sense, that the professional development is aligned with where we need to be, not just about programs. And so I wish I could flip a switch and make it quicker. But I think, I certainly see the results that we're seeing as a district as being indicative of that beginning to happen. And, I'm going to be honest with this board. I'm not going to sit here and say that in 20 months I can turn this around. But I think we certainly see trending in that direction for it to turn around. And I think if we stay the course and not get so excited and saying that it's not happened, I can only talk about when I'm here and what I'm doing. And the board's pleasure is what it is.
Ms. Massey?
To get back to the identification and the disproportionate representation overall, not talking specifically about discipline, but how does the state determine disproportionality? Do they include economically disadvantaged as part of that algorithm, or?
We had to.
They have a formula.
That's a very
Yeah,
good question.
because I asked that, circling back to my question that I started off with, because if what we know from a research standpoint in terms of the impact poverty has on brain development, that it could very well be that the services are needed for students because of their economic status. And so if that, it just makes me wonder or question how that algorithm is being used, or what the algorithm is in giving it the designation. So I'm just curious.
And if I can just add to that, are they looking at your total population for your city, or are they looking at the demographics within your school division? Because for Norfolk, there's a difference.
They use the school division
They should use the
demographics
school
are the
division,
baseline
yeah.
for that.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. So that's, yeah.
Let's just kind of go back to, I think where I was asking, I think where Dr. Robinson was, it's not a question of, we're not experts in this, we don't deal with this every day. We get reports, we get to see 0, 1s, and 2s. So, it doesn't give you a good sense of what's going on underneath outside of the 0, 1s, and 2s. So we're just trying to get a sense of, as a board, where are we? What do you need from us, if anything, in order to support the growth that's happening? Or if growth is not happening, then we need to know, well, how do we see that, measure it, and have impact? So I was just trying to get a sense of, as Dr. Robinson said, you see some of these same scores year after year after year.
And
I knew we've done a lot of work, and I'm just trying to tie the work that we have underway to the direction that we're going, or if
And-
it's something we need to consider, in the future.
And that's why I took us back to what the district redesign work has been with focus schools, and the fact, and we even heard Dr. James Mitchell say in the beginning of where our teachers, and Dr. Rogers also, that our special education teachers are part of the core curriculum professional development around this work. That's how we begin to get at the places in terms of the identification, the support for students, and how we move the needle on the overall performance. As we think about all of this work, we, again, have to make that shift away from that gifted is responsible for gifted students, special education is responsible for students with disabilities, and then the school is responsible for the others. That's why we're meaningful and intentional in terms of the access to the professional development and expectation for that. We're also intentional as it relates to the instructional leadership teams and the fact that special education and/or gifted are represented on those building level teams. So they become part of the overall conversation about how do we support all students and not based on a label or a designation.
Dr. Gabriel?
I have a process question, if we could work through this. So if we, if a teacher notices that a child is eliciting some type of concern for a disability, the teacher, assuming that they have good professional development and recognition, they then refer that to a team, right? The principal or whoever the team is, and then the team is the one who puts forth the testing for the child and then kind of makes that determination as far as some type of a learning disability, correct?
That could be it, but the team can also recommend interventions and supports before they go to testing. So too often people think that the assessment does not happen first. The review of the child's profile and what the academic and behavioral needs are is what's discussed in this team meeting.
Okay.
And then, as a result of that team meeting, a couple of different things could happen. You want to talk about how those look?
Well, let me go back just for a second. So, are we reaching out to our the universities and whatnot that we recruit from to let them know that, we need you all to help focus also on helping your new teaching students to be a little bit more knowledgeable on special education, the varieties of special education, when to identify and what the process is, because I'm pretty sure what the process should be standard for many divisions, right? This is not just MPS.
Yeah, the process is the
Is the
federal
process,
process.
is the federal
so-
process, so.
Correct, so.
Okay, so then go into,
Okay, so what usually happens is we're looking at two teams here. One being SAT, Student Assistance Team. And so if a teacher or anyone, parent, if you know of a child that you suspect has a disability, that's called Child Find. So from Child Find, that person will make a referral to the SAT team first. The teacher should come prepared when she meets with that team with data to support her suspicions or his or her assumptions. And all of that is reviewed first before they go to SEC, which is the Special Education Committee. They may not have to go to the Special Education Committee, depending on what the Student Assistance Team may say. Student Assistance Team may say, okay, well, after looking at this data, we want to recommend some interventions. Let's try this strategy. Let's look at this. Let's do that. So
Over a period of time, and then come.
yeah, over a period of time. So they may not go to the Special Education Committee right off, or they may not go at all, depending on how successful the interventions are that they have put in place for the student.
and I'm assuming there's like a time frame for when
Yes,
they revisit
Yes, ma'am.
those things.
Yes, the team determines if they need a month, 2 months, what have you, and then they will set another time to come back. And then after they look at that data, from the first time, pre-post, as you would have it for the interventions. Then they will determine if that child still needs to be referred to the special education committee. And if so, that team meets and they determine if evaluations need to be completed.
Okay.
And from evaluations completed, they meet. If that child is determined from a eligibility criteria worksheet where you look at all the different disabilities, then if that eligibility criteria, they meet that criteria for a particular disability, then the special education committee determines that this child will be a student with a disability.
And Dr. Ween, you did say that the data that we're looking at here is not this year's data,
That's
it's
correct.
last year's
It's
data.
a one-year lag,
It's a one-year
15,
lag,
16.
okay.
So next summer,
We'll kinda
June,
know.
we'll get
Yeah.
16, 17.
Okay.
Well, we'll let you try to get through the
All right.
more parts of the presentation.
The compliance indicators.
Okay,
yeah.
here, I got ahead of myself. So here we have general supervision, accurate data submission, timely data submission. Those are two separate things. You can have accurate data that's not submitted in a timely fashion, both of which were done in accordance to met the state targets. And then the fiscal audit did not have any outstanding findings. So we got yeses in all those areas for a total area of the compliance indicators at a 70% performance of 20 points available during that year. So now we'll talk about the performance indicators with regards to graduation, reading, and math. We have a graduation rate, we did not meet that at 34.38%. That's up from the previous year at 33%. So we did see some growth there. Deliberate with reading, we did participation, we met that area. Performance, we did not meet that area. We're at 33% for the previous year, but as was shared earlier, we have seen some growth, 3 percentage points this year, so that's some good news. With mathematics, we were at 99% participation and at 41%, which is flat from the previous year. And we did not meet that state target, which was set at 49% for that particular year. So at that.
And I want to really highlight the participation piece, because again, as I do get into my superintendent report, the students who have disabilities are accessing. We're making sure that they are part of the SOL testing window, and that, you know, as if they're in the course test, then they are assessed in that test, in that particular test. So I think it's important for us to note our participation rates.
Basine?
So this kind of circles back to, I think, Dr. Robinson's point earlier. So, you know, in looking over the years, looking at the trends, not just for our district, but in other districts as well. But in talking about our district, it hasn't changed much. You know, the needle hasn't been, and we're talking about previous administrations, boards, I mean, over the last, you know, I looked over the last several years, and it hasn't changed much. So what does the state do? Like, so this report's out there, you know, and year after year, we haven't met the target. What is the consequence, if there is one, or what does the state do with that information?
Well, we're required to have corrective action plans for certain of these indicators. Obviously, the student achievement piece is, you know, what's in the big window. And to your point about it not having changed, if we'll look at our performance with students with disabilities at the same time we looked at the district performance, you know, in terms of overall student performance, accredited schools and all of that, then it shouldn't be a surprise. But it's not an excuse, nor is it a reason, but it's exactly what we're trying to identify. So between 15, 16, and the scores, the performance, we're able to talk about where we've seen some growth. Our level of growth is comparable, you know, when we talked about the SOL scores earlier. our level of growth in some of the subject areas pretty much mirrors what those were as it relates to the state. We certainly need to accelerate our progress. And that's what we've got to focus on, is how do we accelerate the progress going forward. The good news is we did not lose ground this year in terms of the 16-17 performance, but we are not accelerating the progress.
Right. Well, and the reason, you know, I'm talking about even looking back to 2008, 2009, pre-recession, and then looking at, you know, when our district overall was performing at a higher rate. So it's not, you know, just in the last 2 years. So I was just curious, you know, what the corrective action, you know, I understand that there is one, but year after year, what is happening? I know the state's even changed their target over time, what their target's going to be, where we have had higher proficiency rates. But I guess I don't know what I'm trying to get at. What is there, I'm thinking broader, is there something that we need to advocate for from a legislative perspective or resource perspective that's really going to get not just our division but other divisions over this? You know, because it's not just us. You can look at it, lots of other, you know, you could pull up the reports for other divisions, and we're not the only division in this situation. So how, is there anything? And that's a question that we might need to come back and discuss at some other point, but that's something that I'd like us to think about, because if we're really going to move that needle,
Well,
I know what we need to.
I think when it comes to students with disabilities, that it's not a one answer. I think that's a plethora of things that come together in terms of staffing, in terms of financial resources to purchase materials to support the special needs that they have for learning.
But I think it gets back to the core piece. When we're doing a better job with teaching and learning, we do a better job for teaching and learning. We're teaching and learning for all students.
Absolutely.
Therefore, the needle begins to move.
And as you see, the story behind the numbers, that's the flat number, but when you start digging into individual schools, you'll see that you have some schools where they had excellent growth with students with disabilities, and when you start peeling back the layers of that onion, it boils down to having a good teacher who has a great skill set and is able to utilize some strategies that are effective with those students. So to Dr. Boone's point, that's the approach that we've taken as a district to hone our skills as professionals to identify, because it doesn't matter what program that you buy or how expensive it is, if it's not implemented with fidelity and it's in its intended purpose, then you're not going to get the results that you anticipated to begin with.
Okay, I'll let you get to your story behind the
And the
numbers.
numbers.
All right, story behind
That
the
you've already
numbers.
started telling.
So you'll see this graphic probably at every presentation that I share to drive home what we're doing and what we're focusing on: literacy, leadership, and rigor, in no particular order of importance. However, we did spend quite a bit of time focusing on leadership, and that does not only include those who are leading our buildings or central office, but it does include the leadership of our teachers, and that includes professional development, with a strong focus on literacy. And as has been shared at your previous meeting, we have seen some growth in that area, and we anticipate that to only continue throughout the 2017-18 school year. So more specifically, what have we done to improve academic performance for our students with disabilities? Last year, we had an extensive presentation. I think that was in May when we shared information with regards to special students with disabilities, and we shared a video with our collaborative teachers from Jay Cox Elementary School, if I'm not mistaken, and some of the things that we've been doing with some of our partners. And we anticipate continuing those efforts with making sure that students with disabilities have the same access to the general curriculum as other students, and that we're working with our special education and general education teachers to make sure that they are working collaboratively in those collaborative settings. So to the point that where we go into the classroom and there are two teachers in the same classroom, you're not able to discern who the special education teacher is as opposed to who the general education teacher is. And how we anticipate expanding on that is to continue our partnership with TTAC, which stands for Training and Technical Assistance Center, and that's at ODU. The TTAC is present at many universities. William & Mary has one that's excellent as well. But our special education department and ODU have partnered to create a wealth of professional development for our special education teachers, and we anticipate being able to build upon that partnership that was started and is really flourishing. The other thing is to make sure that we include all of our special education teachers in our general education training. That has not been the case over the past recent years, to make sure that we include special education teachers and we're not treating special education as this separate entity that does not include all. So we are certainly anticipating continuing that. And I'm going to ask Dr. James Mitchell to talk about the others.
So to add a little to what Dr. Rogers stated in reference to general education teachers, special education teachers, August 24th, in our partnership with TTAC, we will have a AM and PM session for collaborative teachers to get strategies, to be taught strategies in reference to math. So it will be the general ed teacher and the special education teachers attending those training. We've worked in conjunction with Dr. Cataldo's department to make sure we continue to offer trainings for collaborative teachers who work together. So it's general ed and special education teachers attending that training. Structure your reading is something new. We kind of touched on it last year, but we wanted to look at a program that we could work with secondary teachers in reference to reading comprehension. And so TTAC has come in to train teachers in reference to providing them with additional strategies for reading comprehensions during and after their reading as they work. Developing number concepts. We're going into our 4th year with that, with elementary teachers. And particular schools, we found that we yielded better results, more positive results if we worked with one school per year. And so we were at PB Young last year. And we, TTAC as well as personnel from our office worked with PB Young in reference to teaching math strategies. And we also, TTAC also trained their math specialists. So when we offer PD in reference to special education, we try to always include, if it's math, the math specialist, if it's reading, the reading specialist. So when they go into classrooms, they'll be able to better identify what a teacher, a special education teacher, should be doing and working with a student with a disability in the classroom. Secondary department chair meetings. We have those every year. We will continue to have those every year. And we meet every month pretty much to talk about the compliance topics that are faced in high school as well as instruction. And last year, we looked at opportunities to respond as one of the strategies for getting the department chairs to go into classrooms and to see how the teachers are providing several opportunities for children to respond during the lesson. So we will expand on that again this year in the department chair meeting, so that'll be year 2 for that.
So in essence, the department chair meetings are becoming more of a professional development opportunity for those who are leading in instruction, whereas in past years it was focused
Versus
primarily
compliance.
on operations and compliance. So we're utilizing that as almost a train-the-trainer model for those department chairs to be able to in turn work with their special education teachers in their respective schools to make sure that they're sharing instructional best practice and strategies that they in turn learn from us.
Are those trainings, PD sessions, are they mandatory for department chairs?
Yes.
Yes.
We're not inviting.
Yeah, okay.
They come.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They come. We usually-
Because
But
Because the special education teachers supplement, they're in the classroom with the core teacher,
Yes.
correct? Okay.
And Wilson Foundation's reading. We will be going into our second year with
Right,
that.
this is the second year.
And last year, we did the training to provide the special education teachers the training they needed to teach children with disabilities. This year, we will continue to monitor that, but also with this year, full implementation to fidelity, because we will be going into classrooms and monitoring the teaching and coaching as well. So third year, we will look at getting another cohort of schools.
We're going to start more schools in this foundations piece. We've talked about, again, ways in which we can include more schools over time, and we need to do it, but we want to make sure that we do it well. We don't want to rush into the implementation in such a way that we lose the entire success around foundations. So we just last week, or this week, in district leadership team, we kind of talked about how do we begin to move that into more schools in a way that, because we know foundations is proven to be successful with our English language learners also. And so we're trying to think about it beyond students with disabilities, but how it can impact the district. So we've started conversations around how do we move that even faster.
And this is our partnership with TTAC, who, again, does a lot of assisting with the trainings. But we also have cluster training model that we've used in elementary school. And one of the targets or groups of teachers that we want to really look at this year in those cluster trainings are our new teachers. Trying to see how we can support them and help retain them. So we have a plan for that, just looking at the final revisions.
And where does the dyslexia training fall into? Is that included in?
The dyslexia training is for general ed teachers, so that we'll probably draw on special education supports, but that's not about special education training in dyslexia. Okay. That's a requirement for districts, for teachers.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And then our next steps to continue improvement of academic performance. Of course, as was shared earlier, we're happy about our student performance in the area of reading and writing, and we certainly will work on improving areas in the other content areas as well. And we anticipate being able to do so. But last year, we had a professional development plan that focused on specialized delivery of instructional, as referred to as SDI. And it encompassed all of the pieces that we shared last year, which includes focusing on our collaborative teachers, focusing on literacy, as well as numeracy and partnering with TTAC. And we anticipate continuing those efforts as well. As Dr. James Mitchell shared, working on full implementation of foundations at those identified schools and ensuring that the program is implemented with fidelity. Secondary department chair meetings, and we put that here as next steps because last year we did a good job with starting something. We anticipate capitalizing on that. As was shared earlier, the 3 areas of focus for us are literacy, leadership, and rigor. Our leaders are in the building, boots on the ground. Secondary department chairs are a great asset that we anticipate being able to capitalize on in terms of distributing what's expected instructionally. And then, as Dr. Boone shared, exploring the use of Wilson Reading is a commensurate program with foundations. It's expensive, and we have to figure out.
That might be what Ms. Basine spoke about, looking at the budgetary implications.
Figure out where we want to start. It's an excellent program that's not only for students with disabilities, it can be used for gen ed students as well. However, there are some costs associated with that, but it is one of the programs that have been tried, tested, and true over a number of years that we'd like to take some time to really think about how that might work in Norfolk Public Schools and what resources we may have to use to obtain that.
You see me looking over my shoulder. Dr. Gray went to grab some data, but she was going to share a little bit, again, of what a couple of schools have done in terms of that Tier 1 instruction and the fact that they got double-digit reading gains. Examples of those, I believe, Norwood Elementary and Sherwood Forest. Those are two examples of where they focus on that core and they saw double-digit increases in terms of the outcomes with students with disabilities as it relates to reading.
And I think that'll come out when we talk about individual student data.
And Sherwood Forest was one of the schools that participated in the foundations training.
Right.
And so we received data just today from the teacher, and it showed gains.
So
Is T-TAC an in-kind service?
it's T-TAC and in-kind
In-kind
service.
service.
The state funds
State fund.
the T-TAC centers, as said, most of our public colleges and universities have them. And they have different, I think Dr. James Mitchell shared last year, they have different areas of expertise. So, you don't just have to work with the one that's closest to you. You can go to another T-TAC if there's an area of expertise that they have, because VCU has one, I know.
VCU, William & Mary, Old Dominion, those are the three that we use the most.
And the state funds it.
Yes, the
Yes.
state funds those T-TAC centers, and it's part of their special education, Department of Education, you know, at those schools. And so that's the support.
And they're an excellent resource. When I was a teacher, I was a collaborative teacher, and most of the things I know now come from T-TAC.
Ms. Doyle?
So the professional development sounds excellent, but my question is, what's the percent of special education positions staffed at the start of the year? I know you can't answer that now, but this is my question.
Well,
So-
we're going to update some. I can tell you it's not 100%.
Right, so my
Right.
point is, since we're not 100%, we're going to have people that are going to come on mid-year, and then we need to have this professional development ongoing, because the gap is, are we able to do that? Can we do that? We need to do that, so there's no gap in.
As well as you heard them say in the beginning, the training that we're doing for those classrooms that we know will begin with a long-term sub.
Right.
We're bringing them into the training so that we're closing that knowledge gap.
Right. But I just want to say publicly, one of our challenges is staffing special education teachers, and I know that that's not just for Norfolk, it's for all divisions.
Staffing teachers is for all
Well, period,
divisions.
yes, exactly. But as we're talking about this area in particular, I just want to acknowledge that publicly, but also acknowledge that we need to especially develop those folks that come on, whether they're long-term subs, interim, or whatever the category is, that are teaching these students in the
Exactly.
classroom.
And because of the way in which we are focused on the professional development at each building level and the instructional leadership team work that goes on, each school having its specific PD plan,
Right.
we're also including those long-term subs as part of that also.
Ms. Basine?
Did you have I wonder if we could also talk, a little bit, we talked about this at that last special meeting we had around special education, but with the increase in autism over the last 2 decades, what position are we in now? I know we have general staffing issues, but are there needs that we as a board, need to address or invest into?
Well, I think we're in a good place with that because
Numbers are constant.
we have a teacher and 2 paraprofessionals in each of our autism classrooms. And that's one of the reasons why we don't necessarily have to send students with disabilities to CSEP, because we can maintain them in the school division.
And that was one of the things, I'm glad that that's what Dr. James Mitchell mentioned, because I think it's critically important to your question, Ms. Basine, that we've built capacity over the years to better serve students with autism. And as a result, we are serving more students in-house, but we certainly have the CSEP programming for those students whose specialized needs go beyond what we're able to support. And again, that's another resource for us in professional development also as it relates to students with autism. I mentioned to the board before that there are some things that, some regional programming shifts that the state is focused on, and we will probably be coming back to boards as individual superintendents and asking for an item to be included in each district's legislative package from this region relative to some potential impacts on our regional programs.
Now, we could always use more funding,
Right,
because there's a
of
lot
course.
more things that we
Right.
would like to do to help maintain the students in MPS, so.
Now, are these, so the teachers are also all ABA trained, or they're?
No, they are not ABA trained, but they are, okay, difference between trained and certified. They are trained, they are not certified.
Are trained but not certified. Do we need?
Yes.
Do districts with strong supports have an ABA certified? Is that something that we should be, should that be our goal, to have ABA certified?
We do have ABA certified staff in the division, but they are not teachers that are in our classrooms. However, when the teachers receive the training, they are trained by ABA certified staff.
Okay, so teachers, they're ABA trained.
And also, if we need assistance, CSEP has always been available to provide us assistance because they are ABA certified. And so if we need them to come and to observe a student who we may feel needs supports, not necessarily need to go to CSEP, but need supports to try to help us maintain them here, give them a call. They'll come over and assist us with that.
Dr. Boone, you had some
Yeah.
additional?
Well, Dr. Gray was going to tell the story behind the numbers in terms of the alignment of the PD and what's been going on with schools have said with foundations and that tier 1 instruction, to give you an example of how that looks.
Thank you, Dr. Boone. Mr. Jordan. We had just a few examples, and these were just the ones that immediately stuck out to me because they spoke very directly to what Dr. Boone had shared, that as well as Dr. Rogers, when we focus on the tier 1 piece, all students rise. And so in 2 of our schools that we got out of the denied accreditation status this year based on preliminary results, Sherwood Forest saw their students with disabilities go from 23% passing to 42% passing. You also saw their total rise in English performance going from 66 to 76. So all of her students grew, also her special education students grew. The same with Tanners Creek. There was a very heavy focus on tier 1 instruction, exactly what Dr. Rogers said in that piece of, I'm a teacher of all of the kids in my room, regular ed, special ed, gifted, and if someone's not getting it, I'm immediately addressing it versus waiting for someone else to come in and fix it. And for Tanners Creek, her students with disabilities, the previous year were at 28% passing. This year we're at 57% passing. And her overall went again from 69 to 76. So I think those are just 2 immediate examples that, although it might not show in the aggregate when you put everything together, as we start to see the pockets of where those things are happening, it becomes a lot easier when we work together as a team. And when I saw it, I immediately called Dr. James Mitchell, and I was like, you've got to come down and look at what they've done with their subgroups. And so then it becomes easier for principals to share, and that pocket grows very quickly of taking something to scale. So those were just 2. In Norview Elementary as well, with a brand-new principal, went from 25% students with disabilities in English to 42. So I think the structures and the systems, although they might not immediately show in the aggregate, we're certainly seeing it in pockets working with principals.
Dr. Gabriel?
So this goes directly to Dr. Robinson's question earlier about what is being done, what are the changes that are being made, what is the progress that we are learning from this, and what we're hearing is that this Foundations and the Wilson's Reading, although expensive, does seem to be helping with the tier 1 instruction.
And Tanners Creek is one of them.
That,
That's what I'm just
tier
reading.
1 instruction first.
First.
This supporting the
This
teaching
supporting
of it.
that, and that we're gonna broaden this out to, so how many schools do we have that in right now?
Wilson Foundations now, it's in 10 elementary schools,
10 elementary schools, and then our goal is to increase it to how many others?
another 10 more. Or depending on how much funding we receive.
Okay,
And
you
we
need
do
funding for
have-
10 more schools, is that what you want to do?
Sure,
Yes.
Okay, so that's what we need to work on then.
Okay.
And then at the same time, it's the tier 1 instruction.
Yes.
That's
And
the,
that's
that's the
across the
core,
board.
the tier 1 instruction.
And I
Okay.
believe these principals, in working with them closely with the ILT support and exactly what Dr. Rogers said, they're really turning the corner on that teacher, not waiting for, where's the interventionist that's going to come and help Kimberly? Where's the interventionist that's going to come and help? I'm the teacher, I am the first interventionist, and we're changing that mindset, which is where you're seeing these things
And
happen.
I mean, I will tell you that is happening in the medical community as well, because we are short psychiatrists, we are short psychologists, and so it is coming on the primary care physician, the pediatrician, to learn about all of these disorders and to manage them from the home base, because that's where we're seeing the tier 1 is occurring with us. And so I definitely feel that this is probably the way that we are going to have to go, because we're not going to get the funding for the other things, and this is going to be our best plan.
Building the capacity of our people, our leaders, our classroom
Mm-hmm.
teachers, our support staff is something that, again, and retaining those folks once we've
Right.
invested is how we begin to get sustained capacity and sustained progress.
Mm-hmm.
All right, thank you. It's good news, Dr. Boone. Board, anything else on this piece for now? All right, so we thank you again for bringing that forward. And just a reminder, later in the fall, we'll get the opportunity to go into a deeper dive in terms of some reports that'll come forward on some school-by-school
Yes.
information. I just want to remind the board, because I know Dr. James Mitchell had mentioned some information she had gotten today, and so we know they're constantly getting information, but we want to give them time to massage it and assess it and prepare it for us at a later time.
It's our plan, as data become available, we'll have school-by-school data available September 13th, once the state releases the accreditation ratings for each school. Then we can see some of the lingering questions that the board may have and the public may have, and we certainly understand those lingering questions, but this is how the state does its data, so that's how we work with it. So thank you all so much.
All right, Dr. Boone, you want to,
Yes, I want to go back to the superintendent report, and there are two parts to my report this afternoon in terms of this piece. I'm going to ask Dr. Bailey to come forward and help me with the student academic achievement, what we know of preliminary results that have now become final. And then I also want to update the board on the report we finally received as it relates to the state review of Booker T at my invitation to come in and see Booker T and where we are with that work. And so we'll share both. So I'm asking Dr. Bailey to help walk us through, and really high level, very quickly. No surprises here, because we had done such a deep dive with the data, SOL preliminary data, last meeting, so we'll ask her to take us through.
yeah, we'll let you get through your presentation, and then we'll ask questions at the end.
Certainly, and thank you, Dr. Boone and Chairman Jordan and members of the board. Certainly, my partner in this is Dr. Kip Rogers, and some of this will involve some areas that he has more information on. So, as Dr. Boone mentioned, our numbers have become finalized. And certainly, all of the databases are closed at the state level. There may be some little things here and there that have to be adjusted, but for the most part, you have the full picture. We have some slight changes from what you saw earlier this month, and so I would like to just briefly point those out to you. We're still showing an increase in reading. Part of this is how you calculate the results, because we have two accountability systems. You can calculate it as it relates to accreditation, or calculate it as it relates to annual measurable objective.
Which is the federal.
Right, which is the federal. And when the state puts out the subgroups, it's using primarily the federal. There are other adjustments that are made, and I'll talk about that probably at another time when we talk about accreditation versus AMO. But we're still showing improvement in reading, improvement in writing, a little slight more decline in math, a little slight decline in history. Earlier, we saw more of a closer percentage. And then certainly, we're still showing a decline in science. In line with the school board goal of improved academic achievement, we wanted to share with you how some of our subgroup performances have been and give you some sort of trend information and calculate a one-year difference. And so not to just go through all of this, you have the major subgroups, the major ethnicity groups that we have, as well as the other subgroups such as economically disadvantaged, English language learners, and students with a disability.
And we will populate the additional areas in the board's accountability plan, gifted and military students also.
Right, so that will be our work, certainly for the next couple of weeks, as well as the dashboard. Same thing for for writing. We are looking at our data for ELL, and so because there was some issues with that, we're not reporting it at this time, but the next time you see this, we'll have that information. But you can see that we showed some growth among our Asian and Hispanic students, as well as really all of the subgroups in writing. And again, this is only for grade 8 and end of course. Looking at mathematics.
Grade 8, okay.
Right, writing is only administered grade 8
Oh,
and with
grade
11th grade English, end of course.
And so in mathematics, we show a slight decline, and it has affected generally all of our subgroups. In history, social sciences, we do see a slight decline overall, but increase, decrease here and there. You know, generally, statistically speaking, we say flat performance. And then with our science, we have a slight decline. And I think all of our subgroups had a slight decline, except for English language learners. So, and again, we will be updating this in the school board's accountability plan as well as the dashboard. Keeping in line with the accountability plan, we wanted to see how we compare to surrounding districts in the state. So this is what you have here. We have included Roanoke because they are considered an urban district, however, not as large as Norfolk is, but considered an urban district. We have the same thing for mathematics.
And I think, again, you see very clearly as Norfolk, Petersburg, and Richmond have been identified as the big three, I think you see that we're beginning to outpace the performance and move ahead and beginning to close gaps between the district and the state performance.
I think that's a very important point.
Yes. Yeah, I agree.
That's same thing for history. And the same thing for science. Any questions at this time? Hearing none, we'll move on. Now we have recognitions. We thought it was important to highlight for you that within the last couple of weeks, we were notified that we had some schools that qualified for the Virginia Improvement or Index Performance Report, which is something that was established by the Governor of Virginia. And one of the types of awards is the Board of Education Excellent Award. We have one school that met this criteria, and that is Lawrenceburg. The Distinguished Achievement Award, we had one school that qualified for that, and that's Sewell's Point Elementary. And then moving on, there is another type of distinction that the state puts out. I believe it was requested by the governor, but it went through the General Assembly through the legislation. And it's to identify those schools that have been fully accredited for 3 consecutive years and performed at a high level. And so we have, I think, several schools at the elementary level and 3 high schools.
And again, this shows that piece of schools that have been continuous in their progress, and yet, you know, again, when the accreditation report comes out, we'll see movement there in terms of schools that are crossing the expected bar for accreditation. And so we wanted to share this information with the board because we think it's really great news and a point of celebration for these schools in the community, for those leadership teams and the teachers and what's happening across the district.
And it doesn't mean that they don't have to meet the benchmarks.
Oh, yeah. They have to continue to meet the benchmarks, so they can't take 3 years off.
Right.
Plus the fact the school board has an accountability plan and there's an expectation around those metrics. But again, they will carry the designation of fully accredited for the next 3 years. But our district expectations, as well as the state, is continued improvement and progress.
And as standards change, the number of schools that fall into this category may change over time.
I just wanted to note, at least, you know, an observation, you know, first of all, I think the congratulations are very much in order. And I know Ms. Doyle and I were in a meeting with the Economic Development Authority, and we were talking about some of these same schools, especially the ones that had a strong military presence and what you see there. But as we continue our, you know, conversation, especially our joint meetings with the city, what always is something that I tend to note is, with the exception of Ghent, where you have its, you know, citywide school, you know, we still see where there's neighborhood and community stability. It often is reflected in the performance of the schools. You know, where we see our concentrations of poverty or turnover, or neighborhoods that may have distress, we see that oftentimes that is reflected in the schools as well. So as we continue to look at how we make sure we do all the things we need to do on the inside and continue to advocate for the support in the community, rallying around the things we need to do on the outside, I think this shows that, in my view, not only the excellence of the schools, but also the work that we know we need to do collectively moving forward.
Thank you. We also thought that important to share with you as we begin to receive information data from College Board on SAT, ACT, and AP, that we've had some students who have scored perfect scores. And so while their students aren't listed, I think that information will be shared with you at a later date. But we did want to highlight that for you to see that we have some students that are very, very extremely bright. Okay. And this last slide, I just wanted to point out to you the fourth row in the chart. Whoops, sorry, is that me? Okay. September 13th is when the state will release our state and federal ratings, and that's the accreditation ratings. And I do want to make sure that I explain to you that when you go to the website for the state, the school quality profiles have not been updated with the accreditation information. And so we have gotten some calls related to that. The accreditation information has not been updated.
Those are last year's accreditation ratings that you would find on the school profiles with the current data. September 30th, those will be
Updated, right, because we do have some appeals in place and so forth. And so we hope to share more individual school-level information. We do have some great stories to tell you related to how our students have performed, and so we'll be doing that next month.
So we were sharing this, one, you know, as a commitment to the board as it relates to what's happening in the district. And we, you know, said at the last meeting that the final data would come out the day prior to this meeting, and we would do this level of update, and I'm glad we had the very rich discussion earlier. I want to open the next part of my comments as it relates to the confidence in these scores. And I think, thank you, if you give everybody one. As you all know, when I arrived in December of 15, we were in the midst of looking into the issue as it relates to students who were being recycled. Not my term, the pilot's term, or others' term, that in terms of the recycling piece that was going on. We were very open, very public, very honest about what we saw as the practice. We presented to the board in January of 16. We presented again in March of 16, and I think had a brief discussion in April of 16, sharing what we knew about it, and we showed where we had seen that the trend of changing classes for students across the district, and we saw large numbers of those in algebra and some history courses. We also shared with the board at that time that Lake Taylor High School had the largest percentage of students who were impacted by the shifting of the schedules. And so last fall, an article came out in the paper, and the state superintendent and I had a number of conversations, and so I invited the state to come in and do a site visit at Booker T. Because once again, even though we had already acknowledged that the practice was happening, that it could not be, as I became superintendent, a practice that was in place around test scores, but it had to be what was in the best interest of students. And so as a result of that, one of the things that I wanted to be able to put this to rest. Unfortunately, it's taken from December to August 5th, when I received the report, to receive the final report, actions and expectations around this. But I want to be clear also to the board and to the public that at our last meeting, I referenced some of the declines in algebra and some of the history declines and changes and shifts we saw in world geography and world history, and said to the board that this was, there certainly was a correlation to our stemming the tide on those practices of random changes of the student schedules without the parental involvement piece, without a solid plan of how a student would be able to continue moving forward in its progress toward graduation. And one of the things the state superintendent and I talked about, throughout this process, and as I continue to say, the one thing is, while students may have been shifted in classrooms and changing courses, a student still had to take those courses to graduate. And so there was no way to circumvent the requirements for verified credits for graduation. And so the board's findings, preliminary findings, indicated that during the time of the site visit with Booker T, there were some questions that came about as it relates to whether or not students with disabilities were being afforded the full set of requirements as it relates to an IEP meeting prior to changing the class and all of that. So the board, the State Department indicated they would be then issuing a district complaint, which I informed the board of, and would be visiting our other 4 high schools to see if this was a practice that was limited to Booker T or if this was a district-wide practice. I asked Dr. Bailey to coordinate that visit just as she had been the coordinator for the December visit to Booker T. Dr. James Mitchell and Dr. Bailey came to me and indicated that in their readiness and their preparation with schools for the site visit from the state, the other 4 high schools, that there was clear evidence of practices of where schedules had been changed without the associated IEP meetings being held. As a result of this information, I said to the team, if we see it, we know it, and we acknowledge it, we will submit that information to the state and move toward a corrective action plan. And that's what we did. We submitted that corrective action plan. There was a timeline within the formal complaint that we had, I think, until March 17th or somewhere in that range to submit a corrective action plan. Dr. James Mitchell and I and others sat down. We looked through what we had learned both as they were preparing schools for the site visit. And we had worked with the principals to inform them that this complaint had been filed and that the site visit was on its way. And so we developed a corrective action that indicates what's needed at central office and what's needed at the building level in terms of correcting these practices. So on August 5th, so again, we had not received the final, I didn't receive this official report until August 5th, this final report. But yet, based on what we had shared with the board, you know, from January on, what we knew with this piece, we weren't waiting for a final report to begin our actions and to take action. And so when the final report came in, the recommendations and actions, again, it affirms what we had already publicly stated, that there was a practice of, not my term, recycling occurring at Booker T, and what will we be doing to address it going forward. We also, with the complaint, then, a second way of acknowledging that we saw this practice happening and how would we move forward. You know, one of my concerns, and I stated this to the board publicly last year, is how do we deal with this so it does not become a distraction to the larger body of the work, the things that we've been talking about. And that was our intent, and we've worked forward since then in dealing with these two issues. So the two documents I provided for you today, which again, today was my day to update the board on this since this is our meeting and we had just received this a week ago, Friday. Two pieces. The acknowledgement of the practices dated March 15th that was submitted to Ms. Patricia Haynes, the Virginia Department of Education, by Dr. James Mitchell, and the draft of a corrective action that we were offering as a resolution to the issue in the district complaint. The second thing that, second document I provided to you is the final report that was provided by the State Department to the district around their findings, how the review occurred, what they discovered, and then what are the required actions. And so if you fast forward to page 7, the last 3 pages of this report reflect where we are, what we've been doing, and again can provide some information to the board. That the VDOE concluded that during the 2014-15 school year at Booker T, and as they say, to a lesser extent in 15-16, students enrolled in courses with an associated SOL test were moved to courses without an associated test, or at least back to a section of a course that did not test for the second semester. And so, therefore, the practice occurred, as we have dealt with. The other finding that the VDOE dealt with how students were coded and accounted for during the testing period. There's a window that the state gives us for testing SOLs. We have to begin and end within that window. That allows us to do the initial testing, any recovery testing, any expedited retakes that are needed. Their findings indicated that there were students who may have been marked present at school but absent from the testing, and the two didn't reconcile. And so that was that piece. And as we know, when we have students who are taking recovery tests or expedited retakes, that session is set up, students are called to that location. And we're going to be a lot more judicious and monitored a lot closer, as we've done this past school year, in making sure that there's not just that expectation that the student doesn't show up, then we code them as being absent. If they don't show up and they're in that building, it is a refusal to test. And we're going to make sure that part of our training for this fall in our assessment system will include how do you specifically code students as it relates to this. The third piece dealt with add drop policy, and it's really policy with a lowercase p, because as we've checked other school districts, even before this, because that was a concern raised to us in a preliminary manner regarding these findings. What is our add drop behavior? What does it look like? How do we fully close the loop? And there was a superintendent's memo that came out in March of 2008, and we were able to show where, over time, our policy, our practice around add drops had migrated to a very different place. One of the things we saw, each of the high schools had their own forms, not a district form around add drop. There was also not a district expectation over time around adding and dropping. As we completed the course studies guide last spring, we've included specific language as it relates to the add drop policy. So we've already started addressing that. Another piece of the finding that you will see in the actions relates to the district's awarding of half credits. That has really had an impact on the utilization of changing of courses mid-semester. Let me be clear, it is still best practices for a student to intervene at the point that they are struggling, not allow a student to continue to fail before we act. And so to that point, it is not inappropriate to change a student's schedule, but it needs to be about what the student needs and not an expectation around school and accreditation and what the school needs. And so be clear, we will continue to intervene with students, and sometimes that may require a course change, but it won't be about SOL. It'll be about the well-documented evidence of how students are struggling and how we support them and how do we keep them successful. We know research is very clear that for every grade level that a student fails, it becomes a 25% greater risk that they won't graduate at all. Not talking about on time, won't graduate at all. And as we use in the traditional model of how many credits does a student have before they move on to the next grade level, if a student is constantly staying at one grade level because of one course, they are one credit short, then we aren't helping them. How do we help them cross that barrier that says to them, okay, I'm really making progress. I can do this thing called graduation. And so that's what we dealt with, and that's what we're dealing with. In the actions that the state is requiring us to do, is a comprehensive review, and there are a set of actions by September 29th and a set of actions by October 15th, both of which we are well on our way. Again, not seeing this until the 5th of August. We were well on the way just based on what we knew were practices, as well as what we had learned through our own internal investigation as to what was going on. So conducting a comprehensive review of all high schools and ensure that all students who should have been tested were accounted for appropriately during the 16-17 school year and report the results to VDOE. That has already happened for the district. Dr. Bailey, Kristen McGarrity, and others who are part of our ARA, we had already put this in place in terms of reconciling, and that's why I started my comments today that I have full confidence in the 2016-17 SOL data because of things we've put in place and things that we've stopped doing. Create and implement an add drop policy that is consistent with the expectations provided in the SUPS memo. We've done some of that work. We're going to go back and seek some additional technical assistance from the state to make sure that the way in which we are framing it is consistent with the 2008 expectations. But we do have something in place already that we've initiated for this school year. We must conduct and provide evidence of the following by October 15, and this is training for all MPS instructional staff on policies, procedures, expectations in regards to accounting for all students in the assessment program. And that's what I mentioned earlier when I was giving the example of students who are called to test, don't show up for testing, but are present in school, but marked absent, uses the code of absent. If they are there and they don't come to the testing after multiple attempts to get them there, then it will be coded a refusal to test. That's the accurate representation of that. And so also, the staff should consider how we deal with the practice of awarding 0.5 standard credits. We are moving toward, it will not be in effect for this 17-18 school year, but we are moving because we have to really assess what will be the impact when we move away from awarding 0.5 credits for the 4 core content. So effective the 18-19 school year, we will have made that transition into all of the 4 core content. English, math, history, and science courses will be year-long courses, and you receive the credit at the end of the year, not half credits. We're still examining the appropriateness of 0.5 credits for things such as PE, where you have to show a PE credit, or some of our resource supports, and how we can use that to allow students to access more things that electives that they may be interested in. But we are making that move. We have to see how many students who won't be entering freshmen in the fall and what it looks like in terms of the number of students with half credits to see how we implement that. And so that's going to require us to almost do student-by-student reviews of secondary students to make sure what that looks like. The process of checks and balances ensure that all students are accounted for during test administration. I've already identified that. Process for informing parents of academic concerns and consulting with them prior to student schedule changes. Again, we have already affected that, and because of the district's stance at the beginning of the 16-17 school year, we saw a reduction in the number of course changes, and we also know that there's not an exact science. The pilot had forwarded, we provided data, the state provided data, and there is no consistent way in which we manage this master schedule to know how many students happen. But we have been able to monitor during the 16-17 school year to get an idea of the reduction in the practice, and as we said, we've seen it in the resulting test scores, and so that becomes our evidence. Spring 2017 assessment data review for Booker T, as we learned as part of the state's closing out this work. They sampled some data that they've asked us to provide feedback on, and we have done that effective today. Today was the day for us to do that, and so we'll wait to hear back from the state on that. So at this point, you know, we have, as I committed to the board last spring, that we took this matter seriously. We would continue to take the actions that we needed to take to deal with this. The training will happen. We will be training everyone, including our SDSs, our school data specialists, who code information around student attendance into this. Principals, assistant principals, school test coordinators, department heads, guidance counselors, all of those will be part of the training that we will do to and be able to document as it relates to making sure students are in the testing setting and are coded appropriately. We also will continue to work with and develop, again, as we saw, the processes around the add drop piece, and which we've done in terms of moving to a district form, not each school having a different form, very similar but with slight modifications. We have a district form and district expectation and how that looks, and making sure we're keeping our student information system up to date as it relates to student matters. On the corrective action plan for the special education piece, again, we're well underway with the implementation of the training for central office and school-based personnel around this work, and moving forward with all of the expectations of what happens in terms of the training and the monitoring. Our timeline for completion of this corrective action plan is March of 2018, a year from the time that we submitted it. So hopefully this will put final closure on the situation of recycling, not only at Booker T, but within the district. My commitment has been to make sure we address this. We have already started addressing it. We will certainly update the board as we meet the expectations for the September 29th and the October 15th submission of evidence to VDOE. And hopefully now the pall can be lifted as to whether or not our scores are reflective of true student performance without any gimmicks. Be glad to answer any questions. And I want to thank all of the staff that have been fully engaged in this, from the presentations, the investigations that started before I arrived, through continued investigations, the development of reports and presentations to the board, special education, academic affairs, research, assessment, research, and accountability, and all that we've been doing, the executive directors of schools, to address what our practices will be going forward. We were very clear, Mr. Coleman, Dr. Rogers, and myself, with the high school principals as we started this school year as to the expectations around the recycling of students. And so, be glad to entertain any questions or comments the board may have.
Ms. Wagner?
First of all, thank you for the report. I know that was a concern, and I do appreciate the update. Two things that are still a concern. When I listened to the corrective action plan, the one thing I didn't hear, and I'm sure it'll be done, but I guess I would like to just make sure that when, and I do understand there are some times when students have to be moved, but just to make sure that parents are informed and we document that.
That's a requirement on page 8, page 9, excuse me. The last page of the state report in the Booker T report says develop and implement a process for informing parents of academic concerns and consulting them with them prior to student schedule change.
Okay.
And so that's our requirement, and that's part of the documentation that we're collecting to make sure that each school has fully engaged a parent
I hadn't
in
had
the
a chance to read
conversation.
that.
Right, I know you hadn't, but
Okay.
that's why I
Okay.
gave you a
Thank you.
reference to it.
The other thing is, and I think I've asked this question before, students that, and I know we can't identify all of them, but some of them that have been identified, have we as a district put something in place where we can assist those students to make sure that they will receive the credits that they need, i.e. summer school, night school, and assist them with the financial piece, or what?
Well, we've already been doing that because a student can't graduate until they close those
Right.
half-credit loops. And so we have been working and looking at students when they do their program of studies for 4 years in high school and the annual updates, where we are with that. We will continue to provide oversight as we have to do as we make the transition from half credits for the 4 core content. As we review records, we will be able to see more closely who are students that may need additional supports. We already have a system of financial support for students who need support with summer school, evening school, or whatever else. And so that will continue.
Okay, that was my other concern, because I'm glad that is in place, because previously, that was kind of a problem in terms of parents being able to support financially, so I'm glad that piece is in place.
We, like you said, we've had a system of support. We'll remind the board that evening programs and summer school has to be self-sufficient because we don't receive funding for credit recovery courses in that frame. But we're working very closely. We have to have enough students. That's why, for example, this summer, we didn't offer behind-the-wheel driver's ed. We've been paying more in staff for the last several summers than we had in terms of the number of students enrolled. It made no sense for us to continue to offer that because we were having to subsidize it at a level we couldn't. When it comes to the 4 core, again, we work with families and see how we can give them support to be able to access those
Okay,
courses.
so we have identified some of those students that have fallen through the crack with this and assisted them
Well,
in.
I'm not going to say they've fallen through the crack, Ms. Wagner. I won't adopt your terminology on that one.
Or
They are
semantics,
students-
just give me the right semantics.
There are students who have half credits, and as we work with the graduation coaches to help students figure out how do they stay on that path and make up that half credit that they need for graduation, that's how we're doing it. That's one of the reasons that even during tough budget times, and we had to remove graduation coaches from the Title II grant, that we work with high schools to be able to maintain a graduation coach at each high school. So they are helping us with this process and with students who are falling short of the credits needed to graduate.
Others? Ms. Doyle?
If I could, Dr. Boone, thank you very much for thoroughly explaining all of the work that the division has done from the day you arrived, frankly, when this was shared with you as a concern from the board and from the administration. So I think you've done very good work to turn over the rock, look at the issue, and address it head-on. And I think you've partnered very well with the state for them to understand the measures that we wanted to take, as well as the ones, of course, they've said we need to take, but that you've already undergone those efforts. So I think your transparency around this, starting truly from the very beginning, throughout all the times that you've shared the information with us as a board, is a testament to you wanting to be transparent, and that today's news is not new news. In fact, we've been talking about it for, almost 20 months at this point.
2 years.
2 years, exactly. So for the community, do know that as a board, we have been looking into this issue and this concern and this matter for over 2 years. And so today's kind of the culmination of the final, here it is. This is what we have done, and this is what we will continue to do. And I know we need to look at a policy perhaps and some other practices by all means. But I also want to share with the community that we have certainly taken this concern seriously, as has the administration. We've been transparent with our efforts. And I just want to say thank you for addressing this head-on.
We needed to address this so it wouldn't be a distraction to our work. And
Sure.
so-
Anyone else? Well, I'll just briefly echo that. I know I said 2 years because I remember Ms. Wagner having a conversation with me in August, I think a couple of months after she got on the board, and talked about this, and we were in the middle of the superintendent search at the time, and because I actually think you had some initial discussions when you came and did your visit in October, November, even before the contract was signed, and so I'm glad that it was brought forward. I think as a board, we have worked to include some of this data and information in our accountability plan. I was talking to Matt, the reporter, yesterday when he was sharing the report with me, and I was trying to remember all of the times that we talked about this, and I remember one of the meetings because we were over at Granby High School, and we got chastised a little bit for showing up late for the city council's public hearing. But we were talking about this when we were in that session. So, as I shared with the pilot that, and have shared frankly with folks who have asked me about it throughout the years, that throughout the months rather, the board is not shying away from any of this. We don't have any tolerance for any efforts that we think are being used to distract from outcomes for students. And we're just committed to making sure that every child is getting the support and teaching and learning that they need. And that's why we've spent the time that we spent today and all the time that we spent over the last several months, and will continue to do so. So I'll just say one thing to Dr. Boone. You used the word pall over, I haven't, personally, I haven't felt that because I know the work that we've been doing. Actually, when I read the report, I was surprised that it just talked about Booker T, because you had brought to us these other concerns. So I actually thought it was going to be even broader than some of this, because we did find some instances of these practices
Across the
the district.
And we
But-
shared that.
And you shared that with the board. So it is what it is. We'll continue to monitor it. We will follow up as the state has requested, and in most cases, I think our work we've been ahead of the state in a lot of things, and I think we will stay ahead where this is concerned, and we'll just keep working with parents as well. I think the issue that Ms. Wagner raised about the communication with parent falls right into our conversation we've been having about family engagement, because I can tell you as a parent of having children who've gone through the system, and someone who considers himself an engaged parent, you still have the tendency to, you go to a meeting and the teacher or the guidance counselor or somebody gives you some advice, knowing the questions to ask to make sure that that we still have the right kind of outcomes for our children is something I know we'll continue to work on. So I just thank everybody for the hard work, and we'll just keep pushing on and make sure that the results that we want to have as a division continue to occur in terms of the outcomes that we've talked about today and the aspirations that we've put forward in our accountability plan. So, anything else anyone want to add, questions, comments on this for now? So one of the things that Dr. Gabriel and I will do, working with Dr. Boone in our next agenda planning, is just schedule another update later on in the fall, after we make sure we've checked these things off, submitted things to the state, and if any additional data based upon the recommendations here, we'll just make sure we schedule that as part of our ongoing work under academic affairs. Okay, so next on our agenda, I think, is business and finance.
Ms. Ingram. We talked with the board about how do we begin to think about how we closed out the prior year, what are things we're seeing as we anticipate going forward, and some updates for the board on facilities work, activities throughout the summer, and where we are with certain things. So, Ms. Ingram?
Thank you, Dr. Boone, Mr. Jordan, Dr. Gabriel, and school board members. Today I'm going to briefly give you some high-level overviews from the business, finance, and operations divisions. The topics that I will be covering this afternoon is business and finance overview, year-end process, operation and maintenance, impact aid collaboration, and a brief outlook for 2019 budget. In looking at the business and finance, I'm sorry, we're getting too advanced. In looking at the business and finance, I'm going to go over the budget for this past year, and then the preliminary unaudited financials, and then talk about the upcoming audit. On this slide is basically showing you that our budget for last year was $321.8 million, and it shows you the breakdown by categories. But what I really wanted to go over with you this afternoon, excuse me, is to share with you the comparison between our budget and what we actually have for June 30. These are preliminary numbers. We have not gone through the audit. We are currently in the process of preparing for the audit. But if you look at the major categories, I have footnotes out to the side that I will be explaining later. Our total state funds, the difference between the budget and the preliminary actuals are $4.4 million. City funds is the $3.5 million. Federal funds were down $387,000. Reappropriated funds, $3.1 million, and other funds for $429,000, for a total of, if you look at it this way, it's a shortfall of $11.9 million. But what I'm going to explain to you in the footnote is really not that much money.
Okay,
Board is saying,
we look forward to that.
Okay, the first
Depends on
footnote.
what your definition of not much money.
Well, it's not 11 million, it's something less than 11 million. The first footnote, whether you want to follow with the footnotes or look at it on the previous with the number page. The first footnote, A, is state revenue decreased $4.4 million. Our budget was based on an estimated or projected March ADM of 29,325, and we shared with you throughout the year that our enrollment was down approximately 400 students, and our actual March ADM came in at 28,925. So that equated to a little over $3 million shortfall in revenue. In addition to that, the state was going to fund compensation supplement of $1.4 million that was going to be effective in February, but they did not give us the funding for that. So that makes up the $4.4 million shortfall in state revenue. On note B, the city funds debt service CTI. As you recall, several years ago, there was a tax increase to support funding of the construction of new schools. And basically, I call it a book entry because the city does not give us that money, but we have to record it in our budget. So we recorded $3.5 million, we did not get it, so it shows we did not receive the money. But then on the other side, we can't spend it either.
and it is supporting debt service for the new schools, so it's happening. So like I said, it's a paper entry because it's already earmarked before we get it.
So that's $3.5 million that's part of the 11 million. When we look at our federal funds, the decrease of 387,000, that's a net reduction in shortfall in impact aid funding, E-rate funding, which is offset by increases in NJROTC. Later in my presentation, I'm going to talk to you about some things that we are beginning to do to increase impact aid funding, at least try to identify all of our students. And then note D is reappropriated funds of $3.1 million. This is where last year we had a fund balance, audited fund balance of $1.4 million, and then $2 million we saved from 2016 to fund the 2017 budget. We don't count that as revenue received because it'd be coming from our fund balance. So that is another $3.1 million that's part of the 11 million. And then other funds decreases, 429,000. Reduction in indirect costs, which basically we get from grants, and some reduction in fees and adult tuition due to change in programming and processes. I think Dr. Boone stated earlier we did not do driver's ed, so we had budgeted funds from driver's ed, so that is part of that reduction. So if you look at the summary at the bottom, the $11.9 million that I showed earlier, if we take out the $3.1 million, which is fund balance, that is not revenue received this year, and we take out the debt service piece of $3.5 million that we don't actually get. So our actually revenue shortfall is $5.2 million. So which means if we don't get that money, we cannot spend our total budget as well. So what I'll be going through next, are there any questions on the revenue? I'm going kind of fast.
Well, I have one question I think I always ask and still don't seem to quite understand. On the CTI piece, I understand the conversations that we had regarding the debt service associated with the new construction. But I thought within that there was a bucket to support technology infrastructure beyond technology infrastructure for the new schools. It was technology to support technology infrastructure for Norfolk Public Schools. Are you saying, is that or is that not the case?
It is part of the bucket, but over the past, if you recall, I think only once did they actually appropriate money for technology. Maybe 1 or 2 years ago, part of the CTI actually went to technology infrastructure. But since that, most of the money has been gone towards the debt service.
Right, but
And the technology within the 5 new schools.
Right.
Right, so my question is there money in the bucket that just has not been appropriated, or is it other conditions such that there's not enough money in the bucket to deal with the technology infrastructure beyond the 5 schools?
I think the bucket concludes construction and technology. And it's just that over the past few years, the city has appropriated it for construction. With the exception of maybe 2 years ago, I think we got maybe $1.9 million for technology. The number might be wrong.
Right, I remember something to that effect.
And so I think to the other part of your question, you know, what's the sum total of the 2 cents increase? What does that amount to in terms of additional revenue for the city? And what were the agreements as to actually how much of that 2 cents would schools actually receive? I don't know that answer, and it's one of those things that I have on my to research list and find out.
Yeah, I know we said we're gonna talk about it when we start getting into all the funding formula and so forth, but I just remember asking that question several times because it always gets confusing. But if there are resources there to support technology infrastructure, and we have technology infrastructure needs, I just hope we can, you know, find a place to address that even as we deal with the larger picture of the new construction and all the maintenance needs that we know we have. Dr. Gabriel?
Can we also add on to that to find out, if we don't already know, how many years with the tax that was, the 2 cent tax that was done? Actually, it was 4 cent. It was 2 for the schools, and I thought 1 for technology, and then the other cent went towards city employee raises, I believe, or something with the city. But for how many years will those funds be earmarked for the debt service? And then after that, where does that money go? Does it come back to Norfolk Public Schools, like after 25 years? Because the tax never had a sunset clause. So does that money come back to Norfolk Public Schools, or where will it go? I would like to have clarification on that. Will go towards the next schools that we have to build.
Can we move on to the expenses? This slide shows very high level of the expenditure categories broken down by what we call programs: instruction, administration, attendance and health, pupil transportation, operation and maintenance, information technology, debt service, and school facilities. And this shows that we did not spend $9.3 million. And here again, the footnotes over to the side, I'm going to explain to you basically what those differences are. Note F is mainly due to attrition savings. Throughout the year, whenever I did salary projections, we had upward 100 to 125 vacant positions throughout the year, and that is crossing all categories to include bus drivers, custodian, teachers. We talked about the occupational therapist, the PT, OT people. So throughout the year, we had attrition savings. In Note G, in transportation, it showed that we overspent the budget. What this is, you'll recall as well, I think back in 2014, the city agreed that they will fund replacement of our school buses. What they do is they do not give us the appropriation in our budget to spend it, but we make the purchase in our budget and they pay the bill, the invoices. So what you see there is the invoices that are expenses for making the purchases of these buses. In 2017, they gave us $1 million to replace school buses. In addition to that, they gave us an additional $1 million for the purchase of buses to transport our pre-K 4-year-olds. We have those buses in place, and we will be beginning transportation of our pre-K 4-years-old in September. In addition to that, they advanced us the funding for this school year for bus replacement so that we could take advantage of an EPA diesel rebate, wherein if we take up to 10 buses off the road and replace them with new buses, they will give us a $20,000 rebate, and the max that you can get is $20,000. So those buses are beginning to come into the district now, and what we will have to do is certify that we have actually taken them off the road. I think we had to go through a certification process of drilling holes in the base of the bus or whatever, the block or whatever. So we have to go through all of that certification. Can't sell them.
Right.
They actually have to come off the road. So once we get that certification, we will get a rebate check for $200,000, and the plan is to take that $200,000 and to buy additional buses.
So let me pause. I want to sincerely thank Doug Smith, city manager. He was interim city manager at the time. And this EPA grant was there, then it was withdrawn, then it came back, and so we realized we had a very quick turnaround because this might be the last of those EPA diesel bus replacements. And so the city took the action to advance the FY18 money in 17 so that we could take advantage of this rebate and get approximately 10 extra buses when the rebate comes in.
So the bus, $200,000 will buy 10 buses.
No, the $1 million was by,
Bought 10 buses, I'm sorry.
I'll get the rebate for $200,000.
No, we get, right, I'll get excited. We're gonna buy some new, couple new buses.
About 2 more buses.
2 more buses,
Two,
okay.
3 more.
That's-
Mike can get 3 out of it.
Yeah. You get a good price. On note H is the debt service piece that we talked about on the revenue side. This is the expense companion piece to the revenue note D, wherein we're showing the appropriation for the $3.5 million to offset the revenue. And then at the bottom is basically a summary again to show the $9.3 million expenditure reduction, but if we take out the 3.5 debt service that we couldn't spend anyway, then it actually down to $5.8 million of expenditures we did not, appropriation we did not spend, which if you go back to slide 8, our revenue shortfall was $5.2 million. So we had to reduce our expenses because the revenue went down. So preliminarily, it's about $500,000 difference. But here again, next steps in our process is we are continuing to reconcile, making sure we accrue all expenses for last year to last year, so that number could change depending on the conclusion of the audit that we will have. So on this slide, it talks about the next steps. The audit by KPMG, we have a pre-audit meeting with the audit committee scheduled for September the 15th. That is when they talk to the audit committee before they come on site. They'll be coming on site for the financial audit in October. Our A133, which is federal funds grant audit, is underway. They have been here on site looking at those. And then our student activity funds audit is also underway. They have been out to the schools. I think there's only 2 sites left for them to visit, and then they will be finishing up the audit as well. So that concludes the business and finance sections. If you have no questions, I'll move on to operation and maintenance.
Ms. Doyle?
So 2 questions. Again, you noted, Dr. Rhonda, that, Ms. Ingram, that the revenue summary was 5.2, so versus a differential of the expense of
5.8.
5.8. So are we, I just want to say for the record that we have come in on target for our budget for this past fiscal year?
Pretty much, based on this, if you look at the current year only, we have reduced expenditures enough to cover the revenues, and then we have approximately $500,000 left that could have been potentially spent. But with it being that close and so much going on with this year,
Exactly.
we wanted to be very conservative and not overspend.
Exactly, right. So we'll have met our fiduciary responsibility of meeting our budget, which I wanted to point out to everybody. And also that this does not afford us then for carry forward funds moving forward either, so.
Well, it depends on what the final audit is.
Of course, but
Right.
at least at the first blush, it appears that there are carry forward
And so we
funds.
begin planning for FY19 budget with a deficit of over $3 million because of the hole from the one-time funds
Right.
that we used to build the budget and the other things we did.
Right, right. So I just kind of wanted to make those points clear, because in years past, we've had carry forward, which I know we want to have now a structurally balanced budget so that we don't do that. and that we have been responsible in our fiduciary stewardship of the funding that the state and the feds and the city have given us, that we have met our budget obligations.
And it was important for us to do the belt tightening that we did throughout the year because of the uncertainty that happened with state funding.
Right.
The uncertainty of federal funding changes occurring during the school year, the enrollment decline. So we were very conservative in terms of how we managed our budget throughout the year, given all of those parameters. Because we didn't want to, we couldn't be, when we didn't want to be, we couldn't be at a place where we had overspent our budget.
Right, right, okay. Thank you for the thorough explanation, that's very helpful.
Now, on to the operation and maintenance section, which falls into the school board goal of safe and secure 21st century learning. The school board priority of 3, to improve climate safety and attendance with the focus on facilities. And I'm going to do a high-level overview of our new construction, maintenance / review, and then technology components. Under the new construction, you know, we had the 5 PPA schools, which we opened Southside STEM Academy in September 2016 and Richard Bowling. This September, we will be opening Larchmont and Ocean View schools. And Camp Allen Phase 1 is underway, and they are anticipating completion in October of 2018 with the estimating opening date of move-in date of January 2019. More detailed information on those schools will be part of the Facilities Committee's report that is included for your review. Under Booker T. Washington, I believe Dr. Boone has shared with the board some plans we had for the summer refresh project at Booker T. Washington, and I'm just basically reporting out that we are 99% complete on those items that she had itemized for you. We're anticipating completion. I think it's 1 or 2 items are not fully complete, and we're anticipating to be complete August the 18th. And after we get everything done, then we will be summing up and calculating the cost and share out with you what that cost will be. Under the facility needs of Booker T. Washington, we had the review and assessments, and we really need a full mechanical systems replacement and total roof replacement. The full mechanical system replacement can cost anywhere from $7.4 to $12.5 million, and the new roof is $1.5 million, and I believe Dr. Boone has been in discussion with Doug Smith in the city, especially about the roof replacement. We have some temporary solutions on the mechanical systems. We have a temporary chiller that's already installed, and we have ordered a cooling tower, and that lead time is 6 to 8 weeks, and when that come in, we'll get that installed. But, so that's where we are basically with Booker T. Washington right now.
And let me say, the chiller and the cooling tower, as I indicated in the information I provided to the board earlier this summer, will help with the humidity issues and therefore reduce any potential for mold growth within the building. And if I may, I want to thank Ms. Ingram, Mr. Steve Smith, and all of the facilities staff, and Dr. Stallings, Mr. Coleman, and others who have been so supportive in us pulling off this refresh this summer. The city has also assisted with some of the grounds maintenance work and the interior courtyards, and so we are very appreciative of the support, and we will bring the cost to the board once we have those final costs. But we are paying for it.
Next slide is an update on Maury. You know, we have funded the educational specs for Maury. The scope of the specs is due in on August the 22nd to purchasing, so then they can then put that into the template to do an RFP. That timeline is for the RFP to go out in September, and to fast track the entire process, which means it'll have to be out on the street by I think 21 days, and then you go through the process of evaluation. To fast track that is 10 to 12 weeks. But in order to fast track it, those members who will be on the evaluation team will have to commit to that timeline, which means when it comes in, you got to do your evaluations on time
and go through that entire process. So that's our goal, is to have it fast-tracked to be completed in 10 to 12 weeks.
And let me say to the board very publicly, you know I own it when it's not good news, and I let anybody own it when it's great news. I'm disappointed in where we are with the Maury specs. Let me be straight up with it. The work that I had anticipated was ongoing, did not happen in the fashion that it needed to. Been very clear, we set these dates, and that's where we're going. And so it is our goal to get this moving expeditiously as it relates to Maury. But I will say publicly to the board, we didn't live up to our own expectations on this.
Oh, sorry.
Who is on the evaluation team?
That hasn't been pulled together yet.
Who would be on the evaluation team?
Both instructional personnel, facilities, finance, so it's a combination of the cross sectors of understanding what it takes to operate a school, so it's across.
So could you give me an example who the instructional personnel would be?
Curriculum and instruction, the principal, teachers, perhaps department heads, that'll be to help us look, CTE, help us look at the instructional space and the thinking of how people propose to go about addressing the process of what we have submitted as being that core. Then facilities folks, you know, we have some consultants and folks that we work with also that will help us look at what's the thinking around the systems and everything we need to support the instructional program. And so that's how we build that team.
And what's the process for choosing that team?
This is the first time in a long time that Norfolk has had to put together an evaluation team for educational specs. The PPEA process was a different process, and so we're actually building that process while we go through the RFP timelines for this, because we've gone back to pull information from Norview High School, which was the last high school that we did a major construction. The elementary schools, of course, under PPEA, so we're learning from both of those processes to put together the best team.
So we're developing the team as we speak?
As we speak and as part, so we'll be ready once the RFP.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just
No, just
clarification. Thank you.
great questions.
Ms. Doyle?
So will this be in timing with our educational plan recommendation for the fall? So that we can fold it all?
It'll lag behind that. It will be behind that, but it will be coming.
So I feel like we strongly need to have that fully comprehensive educational plan that no one's really lagging behind, and if so, we need to estimate what it could be so that when we're talking to the community, all of the messaging is out there
We
together
will
at the same
certainly
time.
put the placeholder there and the fact that a separate process is underway as it relates to Maury.
Right.
But that the board has affirmed that that was its #1 project last year, and it continues there and how we move it forward.
That's important as to how we solicit, find, whatever, the funding to support this effort as well as all the other facility maintenance needs and capital needs that we're going to have throughout this educational planning recommendation.
The board's vote that Maury was his first project is solid, and so that will always lead in terms of the seeking of funding from the state. Now, how we work together as a governance team to prioritize the information that comes from the facility index, the next part of this report.
Right.
Then, you know, we can talk about what recommendations administration may make and what tweaks we do as a governance team to that final list.
Basine?
Did you have a question related to that?
I'll come back later.
Okay. So the letter to council about the 2 million, has that
No,
been?
it
okay.
hasn't, and we have edited it and just about there.
Okay.
There was, you know, said, well, is it still relevant? Yes, it still is, particularly when we look at deferred maintenance projects such as the Booker T piece that we had to do, the failure of the mechanical system, the chiller and the cooling tower at Willoughby that I shared with the board. So those are things, money that we're having to spend now with what we do have, and we won't have any money left for the rest of the year. So we're going to somewhat change the direction of the letter, given these summer episodes.
Even though the fact of the change in the funding has been communicated, I think verbally by probably everybody sitting at this table, so.
Me included.
Okay, the next item is the facility assessment report. Phase one of it was to do facility condition index. We were going to assess 16 schools. What we have since done has expanded that to include all schools 20 years old and older, except the PPA schools, Maury, which is a separate project in itself, Madison, and auxiliary sites. And that is anticipated to be completed this month. Phase two of that assessment is to work that into work with the cooperative associates on the educational plan with an anticipated report to the board in the fall of this year.
And we actually have a administrative meeting with Tracy Richter and folks tomorrow morning. We have a half-day session, and so we're well under the way. But I thought it was very important not to just cherry-pick the schools. Based on the conversations that have been going on all year, let's show where we are with all of the schools, and then we can make some very strategic decisions about what priorities and how we bring them up.
Dr. Robinson?
Timeline for the Maury, I'm estimating 10 to 12 weeks, so we're talking mid-November. So we could look for something in our November business meeting.
If that's what the calendar says, then I would say that's
And
very
then
close.
the facilities assessment report,
All of that will be October.
October.
That's the October presentation.
Is that both phase 1 and 2?
Phase one was about what we asked them to do. Phase two will show you will receive the report on all of the schools 20-plus years.
Okay.
Their condition, as well as estimated costs for rehab and/or replacement.
Again, thank you for the clarification.
Yep, not a problem. And then we use that to leverage some other recommendations we may be making to the board.
Right.
As it relates to the overall education plan, and then the shifting of boundaries or repurposing of buildings or closing buildings.
That sounds very reasonable.
Trying to make it a complete package that way.
Thank you.
Okay, the next project is what I titled Cabling Digital Streaming Projects, and this is being done now in collaboration with the Technology Department. Several years ago, when Cox started converting to the digital cable, and then actually came out with and converted to it, the infrastructure in our schools were unable to support some of the data in the schools so they can use their TVs and so forth. We went through several iterations of
Another thing to help my hair grow.
projects, and what we ended up with, we started looking at vetting the cost of what it would be to do the cabling versus streaming, and that's when technology came in with another solution. Because currently, the new PPA school is doing streaming. So, and we are getting E-rate funds, and they had put in an application to turn 25 schools into changing their network and so forth. So it was why throw money after old solution to be more efficient. We would go the route of doing streaming, which would, our entire network will be updated versus the cabling. We'll just pull the cables and maybe change out a couple of core switches. We have newer technology, more efficiency, and again, saving of funding, because we were going to fund this with some old CIP money. Now that we are doing this with E-rate dollars, it is in the operating budget, and the purchases of the equipment under E-rate is approximately 20% of the cost. So we can get a lot more done with a lot less money. On the next page is showing you the implementation timeline. Of course, like I mentioned, the PPA schools will have the streaming technology. We had 25 schools that are included in the E-rate application for this school year, and we are expecting approval of that application this month.
Once we get the approval of that application, we can then purchase the equipment and start the process. Currently, we have 3 schools underway now. James Monroe, Jay Cox, and Oceanair. James Monroe has been completed. Jesse Samore updated me just before I came in. We're working on Oceanair. That should be completed this week. And Jay Cox hopefully completed next week, all prior to the opening of schools. The other 22 schools, once we get the money, the anticipation completion date is December of 2017 and February of 2018. That's time span to bring on the other 22 schools. And then with our application that we will be submitting between October and February for next school year, we'll be including the other 20 schools. And then anticipation completion, if it once approved and by the equipment, it'll be December of 2018 and February of 2019.
And this is one of those things, again, where I want to be able to thank the MPS administrative team, because we have been back and forth with how do we get access to the technology, to WHRO, to the various programs and things that can support our children instructionally. And I was, when presented with this option, it makes a great deal of sense that we get a network upgrade in addition to just plugging in the TV to a box and pulling cable. And so it says a lot about our folks in technology and how they are helping us find solutions and affordable solutions too. So I want to thank them. Thank Jesse.
And then the next slide is CIP capital projects 12 through 15 updates. About 2 years ago, we went through the process of looking at old CIP projects that had not been closed out in the system, and we went through a reconciliation. We even met with the city side, and they agreed that we still have funding available in these old projects. So it's been our goal this year, it's to fund those projects with priorities to spend the old money first. So the money that was in CIP 12, we were able to fund the facilities assessment project and to do the bulk of the roof replacement at Lake Taylor High School. With the CIP 13 money, we was going to complete the roof at Lake Taylor High School. That's where we purchased the Booker T. Washington cooling tower replacement. When we expand the facility assessment project, the expansion piece is going to be here. And then I have down here other chilling cooling tower replacement. When I shared this with Dr. Boone, maybe a couple of weeks ago, when Mr. Smith and I met with her, one of our facilities guys, our HVAC, Mr. Poocher, had developed back in March this listing of chillers and cooling towers that he said that we got serious needs for. And it was about 10 or 12 on that list. And his very first one on the list was Booker T. Washington. His second one on the list was Willoughby. His third one was, I think, Tanner's Creek, and another one which happened we were having our Leadership Institute. So it's like whatever he had predicted, he knew that equipment so well that these are the areas that we're going to have serious problems. So any money that's left in 13 and 14 monies, if any are left, or in 15, we're going to put towards those chiller replacement projects. And Steve is in the process of getting cost and estimates as to what that's going to look like, and then we can go ahead and encumber those funds to use up that money first, the old money first. Then on the 14 projects is where we have the More Education Specs funding from and the relocation of mobile units. At Larchmont with the new school, there were 2 mobile units there that needed to be replaced. And what tasked facilities to do was to look at all of the mobile units we have within the district and to see where we had some that we can just take offline and replace, because Larchmonts were in better conditions. And also at BECC, we had trailers over, mobile units over there when we were building the new school. Mm-hmm. So there were 6 trailers, I keep saying trailers, I'm sorry, mobile units that they decided that they were going to relocate. So that is being funded out of the CIP 14. And I have on the list where those schools will be receiving those newer mobile units. And then CIP 15 money, said preliminary new projects is whatever it's going to need to do those chillers, I think is very high priority because it's very expensive and we have to rent one of those units to take care of what we need to do at the schools.
Just one question, as part of that ongoing work with cooperative strategies, is that are we still looking at how we are moving towards right-sizing the district
Yes.
so that we are eliminating the need for mobile units? Very early on, when we looked at the needs, I know part of what we discussed was how do we begin to move away from that, and so that just made me.
So two things with the mobile unit, and that's, thank you for reminding as we meet tomorrow. Not all of the mobile units dealt with overcrowding. Some of the mobile units now deal with educational programming that was not designed and offered in the way that it currently is when those buildings were being built. So the need for more space, such as self-contained special education and computer labs and those things that have absorbed space in buildings. So that's part of what drives the mobile units. The other piece deals with, overcrowding and program needs. So, but I will make note of that when we're together tomorrow to talk about it.
Okay, on this slide,
Dr. Roberts?
I just want the public and the board to know that this found money was through the efforts of the change in leadership in the facilities department and Ms. Ingram's work to uncover how we can fund some of these projects. And there was debate on where the money could go or should go, and it was decided that the best thing is to make sure that the roofs are covered and the HVAC systems are working as best they can to provide shelter and comfort for students and faculty. Our needs are great as far as replacing other infrastructures like parking lots and drive lanes and simple things like windows and doors, and it's overwhelming because of the deferred maintenance that has gone on in this division for so many years. And I know they did the best they can with the money they had. I want kudos to go to Ms. Ingram and her team through the operations department on what they've done, and a plea to the city to understand that our needs are really great, and it's only going to get worse unless we intervene as soon as possible. And that's why this study, both the Morey facility study and the facility assessment study, are critical pieces in giving us a clear understanding of what our needs are. So just keep moving forward.
So thank you, Dr. Robinson, and that's just what you described is the reason that we made the decision to go beyond 16 schools in the assessment.
Mm-hmm.
We always hear, tell us what you need, what's the big picture? Okay, so we're going to have the full picture this fall. And so then the story has to shift from we need the full picture, and do you have you assessed? So we'll continue to hopefully move that story till we get to funding.
Absolutely.
Ms. Stoll?
So how are we looking for CIP 16 in terms of its spend?
I don't have that right before me. Whatever the projects were outlined in 16, that's been reported to the facilities committees, and I don't have that update right now. But we were concentrating as far as these new projects were coming up to spend, like I said, to spend the old money. Because when we first started looking at this and closing out some of the projects, even though there may have been some left, the city had taken it and redirected somewhere else, so you didn't have anything else to use. So our goal was to identify the projects, get them encumbered, so that we can spend this before that happens to that money.
So can you just give an update of 16 when you have that?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have it that we had facilities committee meeting earlier this month, that I can send that to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Next slide is on the impact collaboration with the Military Economic Development Advisory Committee, or MEDAC. This is a committee, is a city committee that acts as an advisory capacity to the mayor, the city council, and city manager. And one of its duties is to support and strengthen city relations with all military fellow entities and their attendance command. And there are 3 members on the committee that they refer to themselves as MEDAC 3. Michael O'Haron, Tom Bossy, and Brian Donegan, who are partnering with us to ensure that we optimize the annual return on our impact aid program. Back in February, Mr. O'Haron contacted me and we scheduled a meeting to talk about forming the partnership. And we had members from my team, Business and Finance, Dr. Bailey's team, who handles our DODEA grants, and Dr. Bursong, who works with our military in her department. So we had a good conversation, and they left that meeting with, they were going to go out and do some research and find best practices, see what some of the other districts are doing who are taking advantage and identifying those 100% of military connected students so that we can get the most of impact aid that we can. We had our second meeting on August the 14th, and they came back and they had visited York County, and they also visited Virginia Beach, a small district and a large district. And they came back with some recommendations, some suggestions for us to do. Plan of action from that meeting is I'm going to be meeting with my team to see what are some of those items that we can incorporate fairly quickly in our process for this year when we start looking at impact aid, and then to develop a plan or how we can improve for future years. To get to identify all of those students who are federally connected so that we can get funding. You know, it's still uncertain as to what may happen in Washington, but it's still our goal while we're getting the funding to identify as many or all of the students so we can take advantage of that funding stream. And I'll be scheduling a meeting, a follow-up with them in September after I've had the meeting with my staff and before we really start our processes. So it's a good partnership to help the district, and they are really committed to helping us in that realm.
And I was going to say, I've also asked Dr. Bailey and her team to support in the data collection, because if they are data collectors, and then support finance in a way that, hey, they handle the dollars and cents of it, but we help support the data collection in a way.
Right. It's going to be a team effort, and I think it'll be really great. And then the last part of it is just an outlook for 2019. I haven't done anything major with it, but some things that we already know. The governor's proposed 2018-2020 biennial budget will be out in December, so we don't know what the funding's going to be. There'll be re-benchmarking, so we won't know what that revenue stream is going to be. But then on the expenditure side, some of the things that are at the forefront, we want to continue with phase 2 of implementing the pay and comp study. We want to continue to phase in our ITRT positions. Grade 8 will be coming on at Southside STEM Academy. And then we're currently, with academic, they're going through a specialty review program and what funding impact that they will need for that. So those are just some of the things that we know are on the horizon. And also, I think Dr. Boone has mentioned as well, looking into our health insurance and what we can do differently on that front. So that's just giving you a very, very high level things that we'll be looking at in 2019. And that's it. Any other questions or discussions?
Ms. Doyle?
Regarding Impact Aid, thank you very much for meeting with the MEDAC 3. I know they're very committed to helping us, so I think it's great that we took up their offer. I think it would be great for us to show at some point how the new processes in place and how the data collection will enhance our ability to garner that revenue from Impact Aid from where we were in the past. So if we could see kind of a before and an after and what the progress has been made, and it may not be, we have to do a % of, I know, it's not necessarily the hard dollars because we might have fewer students that are Impact Aid eligible, but if we at least know how this great work will result in having a greater % of Impact Aid coming to the division, I think that would be a great story to tell.
Yeah, we plan to track it, and he was even sharing, because one of the questions was, can the other districts really share with us what was that impact?
Right.
And what they said, they have made incremental changes over the years, so it was hard to say what really impacted it to get to where they are. So we can definitely look at what has it been for the last few years when we
Exactly.
know, actually, I got the reports on my desk, so we can know where we're starting from in the
Right.
identification process. And then, once we get through this process, the goal this year is to increase that. So then we can at least compare the numbers
Right.
of identification pieces. So we plan to track that.
Thank you.
And the other piece with that, as we think about our legislative work
Yeah.
at the federal level, and we're going into September in the budget, making sure the impact aid is not zeroed out.
Right, exactly.
Of course.
All right, thank you. Any final questions or comments on the business and finance report? All right, well, thank you, Ms. Ingram. We appreciate that. Dr. Boone, anything else for this portion of our day?
No, I think we've had a full agenda of data and instructional practice updates and where we are with our operational side. So we've, I think, provided a lot of information for us to consider as we prepare to open the school year.
Okay, so with that, we're going to proceed with our closed session, and then eventually we'll make our way back here by 7 o'clock for our business meeting. I have a motion for us to go into closed session.
I move that we go into closed session.
Have a second?
Second.
Moved by Dr. Robertson, seconded by Ms. Doyle. Ms. Banks, if you will read the resolution and call the roll.
It has been moved and seconded that the school board, superintendent, and council go into closed session for the purposes which are set out in subsection A of section 2.2-3711 of the Virginia Freedom of Information Act as amended for the discussion or consideration of prospective candidates for employment, assignment, appointment, promotion, performance, demotion, salaries, disciplining, or resignation of specific officers, appointees, or employees of the Norfolk Public Schools, including consideration of the personnel docket of this state, for the discussion or consideration of disciplinary matters or any other matters concerning students in Norfolk Public Schools that will involve the disclosure of information contained in a scholastic record pursuant to subsection 2 of the above cited code section, specifically the people personnel docket of this state, and for consultation with legal counsel and briefing by staff members, consultants, or attorneys pertaining to actual or probable litigation or other specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel. Ms. Basine?
Aye.
Ms. Doyle?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson? Ms. Wagner?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye. So let's try to get there as soon as we can so we can make up 10 minutes. I understand.